but nobody wants to be interfered on a daily basis by that product being put in. And it's our objective to try to work with this, the homeowners as much as we possibly can. The last thing we want is some kind of confrontation. And I try to work with them. I took over this project at the beginning of January. I think we've made strides in restoration and trying to work with the customers. I'll absolutely make decisions if there's something called for that maybe costs a little bit more money, on the CEC or TDS side to make that homeowner happy. We'll certainly do that. Have a match with that particular person, or telling them, them telling us we can't go on their property and so forth. But it doesn't mean you're always going to make every single homeowner happy either. There's just some people there's nothing you can do to satisfy, what they want.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Councilmember Gillett, Councilmember Joy. Councilmember Neese, did you have your hand up? Councilmember Neese, we'll give you priority. This is your neck of the woods.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. And I'll agree wholeheartedly with Councilwoman Owen. I've had lots of complaints. I've had lots of compliments and excited about the service coming in. But I just wanted to make sure you relayed this to you that I don't think action's being taken quick enough when there is complaints. I know I complained because my yard, they dug 4 holes, they didn't fill it. And then when they did fill it, they filled it with gravel instead of dirt. And then, of course, when they did come out, they don't take really pride in the work that they do. I feel their workmanship is kind of shoddy when they come to repair what they've, when they put in the work. The posts that they put up are leaning, they're crooked, and a lot of people work really hard to make the front of their house with a nice curb appeal, and then we have a company come throughout the city and put in these different boxes that are crooked or leaning, and just really, they don't look the neighborhood, add to the neighborhood. I mean, you can put these in and they could be unnoticed just because they're just nice and streamlined in there. A couple of questions I did have, and I don't know who can answer this or not, but initially I've heard that if a resident wanted, they could have those flat boxes instead of the posts. Is that correct, or are you just putting in whatever happens to be available at the time?
No, absolutely. If there's a complaint and somebody definitely does not want one of those, you're calling the posts, we call them pedestals. So those are ones that I'm assuming that are sitting above ground.
Correct.
Is what you're talking about. We will put in a handhold in that scenario. I'm not looking to get into an argument with that customer. We are trying to do a better due diligence of using those pedestals in more of a rear easement type setup, or in an area where there already is pedestals or transformer boxes, right? So it kind of blends a little bit with all the utilities that are currently there. We are moving further and further away from just putting a pedestal in a yard and that's the only one there. We do plan on moving forward with just kind of placing those handholds. So that has been something we've heard, and we are adjusting to try to accommodate that as best as possible.
Okay, just to confirm that, are you saying that you're giving the resident the option, or are you just saying if they happen to say, no, I don't want that pedestal, they would then ask for the flat box? Are you leaving the decision up to the resident to know that, or is your employees asking the resident for which they would have?
We're not really asking. I mean, we go by the construction drawings on what we're attempting to do. I can tell you the pedestals are far cheaper than doing the handles in the ground. In a cost perspective, everybody understands, you're out there to, basically it's still a business proposition, right? You're out there to do a quality product, but also deliver it in a cost-effective way, right? So, I mean, we're going to use those pedestals where we absolutely can use them, where we feel they're not going to be an eyesore moving forward. But if I do have a homeowner that, has some kind of concerns regarding that, we'll do what we can to try to accommodate them as best as possible.
Okay, and then
how it goes for swapping out to a handhold, we will do that.
Okay, and so when I made my complaint about the hole in the yard that was probably 3 feet deep that had sunk over the winter and didn't have anyone come out for 4 months, I had to actually call the Public Works Department to get someone out there to contact you to get that done. How can residents get their yards repaired faster and let them know that, someone's going to actually take their complaint serious as far as what needs to be done?
No, understood. I mean, I have all my guys out there. I've been informing them. I try to meet and put as much information out there. TDS also has their triage ticket system that they've created, that when customers call in, We get a list of those triage tickets on a weekly basis from them. It actually keeps track of the date of when that call was done and what we've done to try to resolve that. Sometimes we can't get things resolved right away, depends based on just kind of where we are in the construction part of things. Sometimes we have to leave holes open, which we try not to. We try to cover them with cones, and if they have to be left, they should not be left for long term. So if you had a 3-foot hole deep that was for a long period of time, I apologize for that. If you're talking about that being last winter, you know, I have made a lot of changes from what the previous CEC administration was doing to try to resolve a lot of that. First off, it's a safety hazard. Secondly, like you said, it's an eyesore. Nobody wants that in their yard for a long period of time. And I'm trying to do everything I can to try to reduce that and eliminate that as much as possible.
Okay, thank you. I just hope that as this goes across the city, that your crew takes a little bit more care for homeowners' yards as they work in them, and mainly when they restore them. That would be very, very helpful.
Thank you. We had a message on this end, popped up, said Todd Naylor was raising his hand. Todd, did you have something you wanted to add in on any of this, or?
Yes, I just wanted to, the best way for anybody in the city to report a problem is to actually call that UPS number, because that goes directly to TDS. All those are tracked, prioritized, and then we actually can manage them and have eyeballs on them, and they're all given like a 1 through 4 system, 1 being, 4 hours and a 4 being 24 hours to make contact and resolution. So if you guys are getting a bunch of calls from the city or from residents, the best thing to do is to steer them to that 800 number.
And Todd, would you happen to know that 800 number off the top of your head? There's a lot of people who might be watching this, and they might want to make a note of that if you have it available.
I do not have it off the top of my hand, but I can have it before this is over.
Yeah, if you would just put it in the chat box or put your hand up again, and we'll try to get that recognized before we wrap up on this item. We had a few more questions. Councilmember Gulick, Councilmember Joy.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for being available for taking questions. As the rollout occurs across the city, some areas have alleys, others do not. Is the areas that have alleys, is that underground work there, or is that working with existing utility poles? What does that look like?
It'll be a combination between the two. So CEC's also we're doing the engineering on this as well. There is going to be some adjustments, but primarily we are going to try to utilize those aerial poles. There's obviously not as much aerial up in the heights as there is in the lower areas of Billings. And once we get down into those areas, our objective is to try to utilize those poles where available. We do have to, apply for permitting and, with the Northwest Energy. And we are doing that currently, working with them on what make ready is required for each of those poles to be able to get on them. And we're working through that process. So we will utilize that when available. That's our first option. Rear easements through the alleyways is another great option that we try to utilize as well. I think it doesn't disrupt the people's front yards as nearly as much, and allows us to be able to, service more houses a little bit more rapidly. So, as we get into those areas where we have a lot of that, those alleyways, we're going to try to utilize that as well.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Joy.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I just wanted to ask, have you been working over on 20th Street West and Monad? Is that the hole and the plastic gate around holes? Is that your work? Thank you. No?
Typically, we're not doing plastic around, but we may. Unfortunately, I apologize. I'm not 100% familiar with every street and crossing within.
Our Public Works Director, Debbie Melling, I think, is going to take responsibility for this.
Right.
Debbie?
That's a different contractor working there.
Okay.
Yeah, and if you get a hold of me after this, I can look into what you have going on.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Just a question for you, gentlemen. My understanding is that because of the problems with getting some of these restoration projects done, there were so many of them, the city declined to issue any more permits. My understanding is that situation is getting better, but still not there. But the idea is to make sure that that restoration work is done before new permits are issued and the problem gets bigger. Are we all in agreement that that's what's happening? And are we going to be in a situation where we can start giving you the permits that you'll need to actually complete this project, because you'll get those projects, those restoration projects done?
Absolutely. That's been a huge focus for me and my team with CEC through the 2023 timeframe. We had 2 permits roughly closed out in the turn of, going from 2022 to 2023. I'm happy to say, we're at like 14 permits closed now. So we've done a lot of that work to get that restoration caught up in working with the city. We do have 4 that I'm currently working on right now. That construction's almost at the point of completion. I've already got a schedule planned for these 4 to have all the restoration work. That's asphalt, concrete, and landscaping, any of the we call it soft restoration, which is grass and dirt, by the third week of October. So that's all going to be getting done in this time frame for those 4 that we have permits out for right now. The construction is almost completed.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. Councilmember Purington?
Just a quick question. What is your end date, completion date?
End date for all construction within Billings?
Yes, sir.
I'm going back and forth with my engineering firm. So my engineering right now, they're engineering out for 2024. I know that the original project end date was supposed to be in 2024. The amount of work that we still have to do, I do not foresee us being able to complete that. We're looking at more of like the 2025 timeframe to get this work done for the TDS project.
Okay, thank you very much. And Todd, did you have that 800 number for anybody who has problems?
So I do have the number. I do not see a chat anywhere to put it in.
I'm sorry, I missed what you said. Could you say that again?
So I said I do have the number available, but I do not see a chat section.
That's okay. If just tell it to us and we'll write her down.
Yeah, so it's 800-737-4172. And I know in other cities that we work, they actually put that somewhere on their, local town page. So people know where to go before they go to the city.
That's great. I would think that's something we should do or already have done. It's an important number, 1-800-737-4172. Okay, thank you very much. If there's nothing else from council, we'll open up for public comment. Is there anybody who came to comment on item number 2, the TDS fiber update? No one is coming forward. No one is online. So we'll close the public comment period on this item. Council, anything else before we move to the next item? Doesn't look like it. So was there something else, Debbie? Oh, yeah, thank you. So we need to get you off our screen. There you go. We're very good. We're back. All right. Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate your being with us here and providing this information for us tonight. And thank you, Debbie, for your update. And that then concludes item number 2 and brings us to item number 3, our stormwater program update. In case you don't know her, Debbie Melling is our Public Works Director.
Did that work? Yep. Okay. Well, we packed the house tonight. So the first thing I wanted to do is introduce some of these people because they worked really hard on this, and they're here to answer all your questions. And so Lisa Olmstead, Wade Iron, and Greg Gable from Dowell. So they're here local. And then we've got Toggy Acker. Okay. And he's with FCS Group, and John Giralducci, and I know I said that wrong, John, I'm sorry, but he's online. And then we've got an advisory committee member, Rick Luthold, and Jennifer DeRay, although you're probably gonna have to wear 2 hats on this one. And then Derek Miller and Tyler Westrop with the city, and Councilmember Gulick as also on our advisory committee. So, and he's actually gonna answer all the questions tonight, so I was super excited about that. So, yeah. So last time we came in to present was probably about 1.5 years ago, and We gave an update, and there was kind of some confusion about why are we here, what are we doing? So tonight, we're going to be really, really clear about what we're doing and why we're here. So we are in phase 2, trying to move into phase 3 of a stormwater planning project, basically. And to move into phase 3, we have to have 3 primary questions answered so that we can move on to the next step. Tonight is not asking for a rate increase. It's not asking for any decisions that are final and lasting, and this is what you're going to be stuck with. But this is to allow us to move on to the next phase without carrying a lot of different options forward. So you're going to be asked 3 things, and I'm sure you guys all know this because you read your packets. But the rate structure that we want to put in place is going to be a discussion tonight. Whether we use development fees moving forward. And the third thing is, what level of service do we want to provide? With every service that we provide, there is a level of service that we are very intentional about. We know how often we sweep the streets. We know how we plow snow. We know what our water is that we serve to our customers. We have never really come up with a level of service that we want for our stormwater system. And so that's the conversation. Those are the 3 questions you're going to be asked by the end of the night. So Tyler's going to do the bulk of this. Sit back and get comfortable. He's ready to go. Thanks.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I've met some of you before. It's a pleasure meeting the rest of you. So yeah, hopefully by the end of tonight, like Debbie mentioned, we can kind of work through the three topics that we're after. The stormwater team has been updating our process over the past 3 years, mentally for much longer than that, but formally for 3 years. And we've reached a nice stopping point where we really need council's input and direction. So again, that's the rate structure, system development fees, and a level of service to the community as we look at our stormwater program. So what is a stormwater program? Really, it's a dedicated focus on the critical infrastructure that we take care of. It's a manageable time frame for deferred maintenance, capital improvements, and it addresses permit regulations with DEQ. Billings does have a permit with the Montana DEQ for water quality, and it satisfies risk management objectives. So why are we here? What is being evaluated, or why is this being evaluated now? Stormwater is $1 billion asset for Billings, and it's one of those core infrastructures that hasn't necessarily received the same attention as our other infrastructure. And so, in taking a look at it, we learned that much of the system has unknown elements. We want to learn more about that and address it. Public roads and homes do flood in storm events, and development is outpacing our existing infrastructure network, and we have a map that shows that a little bit later. But really, we have a growing list of deferred maintenance and capital projects that we need to address. So some of the history, Debbie kind of touched on a little bit. We have been working on this since 2020. We were in front of a work session in June 2021. And at that time, that's when we started to form the advisory committee. And the advisory committee started to kind of chew through topic by topic to come up with, ultimately, the level of service package here. So, and some of the other programmatic needs. So depending on how tonight goes, that's where we're going to move to phase 3, with just a little more clarity, hopefully. So phase 1 was really investigation. The 4 groups you see up there at the top: engineering, street and traffic, environmental affairs, administration. Those are all public works groups, and really kind of circling everybody up who touches stormwater in public works and say, what do you do? What do you need to do better? Or what could you do better? Determining our people, equipment, and budgets, really as a holistic endeavor, and working pretty closely with our GIS department. At the same time, the city was going through our asset management and GIS updates, and so this made a lot of sense to really work closely with those groups to see how stormwater fits in with the computer updates. Reviewing previous master plans, Billings has a lot of studies that have done, but mainly local to those individual areas, not holistically. And really, at the end of this phase 1 evaluation, we found that it was really more of a study of what we didn't find, which was about 65% of our system had some unknown element to it. Unknown size, age, and ultimately condition is what we're after. So all these pictures are taken from Derek's cameras from our pipes. But what we did find, just some stats for you guys. We have 300 miles of storm drain pipe, 5,200 manholes, 52 miles of open drains, 9,300 inlets. Those inlets are cleaned, but they clog up, multiple times per year with rainstorms. 50 acres of ponds, 8 miles of culverts. I wish it was one 8-mile culvert instead of 800 feet at a time. 16 key outfalls to waters of the U.S., 9 stormwater pump stations, and about 11,000 hours of street sweeping. And we put street sweeping up there. Street sweeping is a critical component of our storm program. It is much more efficient to pick it up, the sediment on the surface than once it gets into the pipe. So for any community, street sweeping is a vital asset. And what we kind of learned out of phase 1 is some of the stuff that we already knew. It's a very reactive and crisis-driven program. Picture on the right, that is a culvert at King East and Jackson. Rainstorms kind of collapse our culverts. We find a lot about our system in big rainstorms, not in a good way. So because of that reaction crisis-driven state, we are able to stay ahead of maintenance and bumping up against regulatory requirements, and certainly staying behind growth. So cost of inaction is I know something our advisory committee talked a lot about. Not doing anything is not feasible. Examples is just some reactive and unknown maintenance leading to issues. Just a couple pictures. This is the same culvert. That culvert up on the upper left, it was looked at, inspected. Hard to inspect culverts when they flow water all the time, see what's underneath of it. Then you get a rainstorm like we had in early June, and all of a sudden we end up with a pretty large road failure. This is at Gable Road by Shipton's. And this is probably going to be a $750,000 project to mitigate. Reactive unknown maintenance, with those 50 acres of ponds that I showed earlier, vegetation grows, and actually they grow really well in pond areas. But when they're not maintained properly or is frequent, either private or public, you end up with pond overtopping. The picture on the lower right, that's water just overtopping into the BBWA canal up in the Heights. Undersized infrastructure and consequences. Again, these are from large storm events, and it's not this program or the city's intent, or really any city's intent, to design for records. And we have seen to have a lot of records lately, but we still have to deal with the effects of it. Sediment, culvert failures, staff time. These are big events, impacts to traffic. These large storm events do hit Billings, and we need to manage them somehow, some way. It also leads to, consequences for real people. Real people get water in their houses. That's a thing that we deal with every big storm. Some small storms too. Picture on the right, it's a street that's flooded. 3 vehicles have been totaled out of that intersection. So these are areas that are high on our priority, areas that we want to fix, but areas that are challenging to fix with our current program. So phase 2, that was really the meat of our work, and it was really trying to dive into what's it going to take. Deferred maintenance and capital were our 2 main items. We also looked at flood risk mitigation, local flood risk mitigation, water quality. What we found is we had about $74 million of deferred maintenance and $103 million of deferred capital projects. And we did work continually with our street and traffic crews to kind of learn more about our system in terms of TV and come up with that rating category for the deferred maintenance. So as a part of it, those are big numbers to talk about. Coming up with the financial plan and rate analysis. How do you generate revenue? How do you change your revenue forecast? So, and ultimately that is where the advisory committee process started. And that's where we worked through the issues. So the advisory committee, you met a lot of them earlier. Some of the members that aren't present here, we had realtors, developers, 2 separate developers, landowner, member from the Public Works Board. We met 7 times from 2022 to 2023. And we also provided recommendations on these 3 topics of the levels of service, the rate structures, and the system development fees. Here's a map of our deferred maintenance areas. We only have about 53% of the city TV'd. The yellow and red areas are areas that we got to replace. And we know that list will probably grow when we finish out our mapping exercise. But we accounted for that in that $74 million deferred maintenance. So it is kind of a story of, you can see where your old infrastructure is. Downtown, 13th Street West area, not a lot of infrastructure in the Heights, and not a lot to replace, but that's kind of the story of our deferred maintenance map. Counter to that is our deferred capital map, our citywide capital. And I mentioned earlier, you can see where development is outpacing the city. The pink area is where we have probably the most capital projects shown. Our storm system effectively stops at Shiloh. And obviously we have development farther west than Shiloh. So that's where most of our capital projects are occurring. But we do have identified needs up in the Heights, a lot in the Heights, Bidtown, Southwest Billings. Those are projects that came out of our Phase 2 study. Flood protection capital, that is something that was important for our committee to look at. These little stars on this map reflect where we have local flood mitigation potential. The Billings is kind of intertwined with ditch and drain networks. We were kind of built around ag land. And so we have a very intimate relationship with ditches and drains, sometimes positively, sometimes negatively. But these strategic locations were evaluated as ways to where if a ditch were to fail, how to have a controlled failure without impacting the public. So as our committee, as advisory committee kind of worked through this process, we knew there wasn't going to be one answer. We didn't want to come up with the answer, not that we could, but we wanted to come up with levels of service. That's kind of what we was really trying to work hard towards. And this map, or this exhibit, is really it. This is the crux of it. So I want to spend a little bit of time on this. We have 3 levels of service. We got 4 program categories: deferred maintenance, citywide capital, flood protection capital, and water quality capital. And then 3 service levels for each. I do want, as you look at this, and hopefully in your packet you picked up on it, we don't want you to think of this as a column of minimum or a column of proactive or a column of best practice. That those categories apply to each individual program component. And the main part of that program component really is the years. How quickly do we want to address these issues? For deferred maintenance, do we want to knock off our deferred maintenance at 15 years, 20 or 25 years? 15 years, it feels like it's coming up. It really, for a pipe that's already 100 years old, and our map is already dotted with yellow and orange. That's a real number. Citywide capital, 40 years, seems like a long time. I'd be 81 years old then when all this is done. So within my lifetime, hopefully, but it feels like a long time to do deferred capital. A lot will happen in Billings in the next 40 years, hopefully. So the nexus between levels of service is rates. It didn't advance. So what do we do with rates? And looking at our current revenue profile, you have the rates are used for two things: operating and capital. Operating is just what you see there: employees, salaries, benefits, bill processing, regulatory compliance. The bulk of it is really your capital, repair and replacement, and capital improvement projects. This is our current revenue structure right now. This was developed in 1977, the best data at the time. It's based upon zoning and gross lot square footage. The advantages of it is status quo. Nothing has to change. It's been legally challenged and upheld, but it has some real downsides to it. And the main one is fairness. Zoning may not align with land use, and there really is no nexus between land use and the impacts of the impervious surface. Is really what drives stormwater, is how much impervious surface does any one lot have. So, and it does result in large disparities between properties. For reference, the N1, N2, and N3 are all the residential zone districts, if you forgot what zoning district you're in. Here's some examples of just some houses, house and business. The first one, 2,800 square feet of impervious surface on that lot. Second one, 2,500 square feet impervious surface. So relatively the same impervious surface, kind of the same impact, drastically different rates. One pays $469 a year, one pays $28 a year. Here's two commercial properties, exact same gross lot square footage. One pays, one is 83% impervious, one's 42% impervious, but they pay the same. And here's some large commercial, Wells Fargo downtown, 20,000 square feet impervious. The Holiday gas station, about that same amount, different rate. So you notice that Wells Fargo downtown pays less than that home up in the Heights. So what to do about that? We had a lot of conversations about rate structures and how to address some of these outliers, and really looking at, we talk so much about impacts. I want to spend a little time talking about the benefits. Residential customers, everybody's under DEQ's permit. Whether you have a big house, big lot, small lot, everybody has to be under DEQ's permit. Everybody has probably driven a city street when it rains or there's been snow melt. So everybody does receive a benefit for stormwater infrastructure being maintained and having new. So when you look at this rate structure that we proposed, what it does is it takes the median residential impervious surface. We were able to measure that with an 80% confidence level so far to come up with a median target for impervious surfaces. And then commercial properties are measured against how much they have in relation to that residential median. So under that approach, what does it do to some of these homes and businesses' stormwater assessments? First one, their annual amount went from $469 a year to $85 a year. That smaller house, $28 a year to $85 a year. A house is a house is a house, whether it's big, small, big lot, small lot, because their relative impacts, the entire system, are relatively the same. Some of those commercial ones, again, you see that they have different rates, same lots, different impervious surfaces, so different rates. And again, same with the large commercial. Same impervious surface, relatively the same rate. Next thing the committee looked at was system development fees. System development fees are already in place for our water and wastewater systems. They're a one-time charge, not ongoing rates. It's basically new growth paying for new growth. It's buying into the system that isn't there yet. So it is really to recover the proportionate share. It's not for your individual subdivision by subdivision or home by home improvements. This is the larger picture, kind of that pink area. So what the committee recommend? The committee did recommend moving to an equivalent residential unit impervious surface model. The committee did recommend implementing stormwater system development fees. For reference, here's how the system development fees are anticipated, approximately $1,000 per month for stormwater. You can see our water and our wastewater on there as well. I'll hold on to it. I see you guys writing. So then the committee, when we met, we had a nice conversation about how quickly to accomplish it. And what we decided was deferred maintenance, get it done in 15 years. Flood protection, also a 15-year time frame. Citywide capital, 20-year. And water quality was an annual amount, $500,000 per year. And that's to really help demonstrate to Montana DEQ that we are improving our water quality. And these packages do include a 7-year ramp up as we start to look at the next slide on the rates. But why do we choose this? Focus attention on critical infrastructure and really satisfying our risk management while balancing services and rates. So here's what that anticipated revenue profile. Again, these are estimate numbers. The revenue profile for each level of service, the best practice up at the top, proactive and minimum. We did go to the council's budget and finance committee twice. Made a similar presentation and discussed it with them. The budget and finance committee made a recommendation. They're kind of over there on the far right-hand side. What they also recommended that 15-year deferred maintenance time frame. 15-year flood capital timeframe. But they asked us to do an evaluation of 25-year, kind of midway between best practice and proactive for citywide capital. And again, they went with water quality at $500,000 per year. So that revenue profile, a little lower than the one that the advisory committee recommended. In at 9 years from now, after a 7-year ramp up, your monthly rates would be proposed. Still a lot of work to do if this is our decision moving forward. It is around the $17.5. So 9 years from now. As Debbie mentioned, nothing new this year. This one, if we went forward with this program, it wouldn't be till fiscal year 25. We did go to the Public Works Board, and they recommended the same package that the advisory committee recommended. And we do have support and endorsement from the Energy and Conservation Commission too that we presented to. So what are we hoping to get out of council tonight? And that really is some clear direction. You know, as we move forward with this, we are at a great pausing point, but we don't necessarily want to take 3 proposals and keep evaluating 3 proposals. We want to hone in on something. And I do want to stress that there's 3 independent items. You know, they're not dependent on each other. They are 3 separate independent. As we progress our stormwater program, we want to bring the same focus and attention that our other utilities. So we do want hopefully answers on all of them. But with that, I guess I'll open it up to questions for either myself, Public Works Director, or any of the advisory committee. So.
Tyler, thank you very much, and just a note of appreciation to the whole Public Works staff. We know this has been a heavy lift, and the advisory committee and budget committee and all the other committees you've run it by. So thank you for your hard work, and this will be interesting. Questions, comments? Councilmember Owen, Councilmember Joy?
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to chime in with a little bit of our budget committee discussion and to echo the thank you. You guys spent a lot of time with us, and we really appreciate it, provided tons of extra materials and allowed us to dive in. And obviously, we wouldn't have been so successful without Ed's good input and work on this. So I think it was a good discussion. I think a couple of the things that we talked about on the budget committee that I would just highlight to my colleagues is sort of a belief that our decisions on at least the backlog or the sort of levels of service was driven by kind of a safety first mentality, that's why, you know, the water quality and the flood protection, I think, floated out as absolute priorities for us. The deferred maintenance, I think, Tyler, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but when you presented this to us, it's sort of a menu, right? So council could choose, you know, the proactive level of deferred maintenance and the best practice of capital or any of those sort of things. And so I think some of the numbers under the minimum and even under the proactive struck us as sort of silly. If you have your basement blowout, saying, well, we'll get to you in 25 years is kind of a ridiculous response from us as a community. So, but I think that the only place where I think at least I hesitated was in that jump between 20 to 30 years, from 30 years to 20 years. So thank you for throwing that option up there for us to talk about. But what drove our discussion at council was safety first. How do we make this safe community? And then how do we kind of manage costs? We talked a lot about workload and whether or not the Public Works Department could do all of these projects if we started making these rate increases. And so we had some conversations about the impact on staffing. And then it's I don't recall if I heard you say it, but it's my understanding that if we approve the concept of a system development fee, that needs to be set by a rate study first. So we won't be presented with that until we have more data on what those system development fees should appropriately be. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, so, yeah, I think the budget committee, as you said, we seem the equivalent residential rate unit was our recommendation as well, and that we move forward with a rate study for system development fees, but then, as you can see, kind of where we came down is at least wanting to see that alternative on the citywide capital. So, Ed, I don't know if I missed anything from our conversations, or Mike, if I missed anything, but that was our perspective from the committee.
Again, maybe just to stress again, we were looking at what are the costs of inaction. If we don't take care of things, if we don't up the level of maintenance that we've been doing, we're going to see potentially a lot of culverts collapsing, a lot more of the kind of challenges, and that's going to affect not only the public right of way and we're going to be spending a lot of tax dollars fixing our streets and whatnot when there's collapses. but we're also potentially jeopardizing a lot of private property adjacent as well. So the lowest cost approach to all of this is to take care of the problem. That's the, and so I think that's the, yeah, I think we're looking at. I'm sure there'd be plenty of questions about, because, there's only so much you could absorb in 20-minute presentation or something, but the equivalent residential unit, I'm sure there'll be questions on that, and we'll look forward to addressing questions.
Okay. Councilmember Boyette, were you on that? Did you want to comment? And then Councilmember Neese, Turkington?
I mean, I went and visited majority of the properties that were in these pictures, and we either fix it now or we fix it later, and it's not going to be cheaper later. So now is the time to do it, and I think we tried to come up with the best plan. So, I mean, we spent a lot of time, and the guys here were really good. I mean, gave us all the information and attention that we wanted, and I think we need to do it. We need to move forward.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Neese? Oh, I'm sorry. I recognize Councilmember Joy way back in the late 1800s, so go
Yes,
ahead.
thank you, and I feel just as young as the late 1800s. So just one question. What about properties that don't have any stormwater? There are unimproved streets or, I don't know, blacktop surface streets in Ward 3 that don't have, so what happens to their property in terms of their tax, whether or not this is assessed, and how do we get some storm drains where there aren't any? Thank you.
Councilmember Joy and Council, thank you for the question. Yeah, there are a lot of properties that don't have conventional storm infrastructure. Ward 3, portions of the Heights, a lot of the Heights, actually. So the way that Public Works approaches stormwater is it's not just the pipes and inlets. That's not part of the storm system. That is obviously part of the storm system. Your roads drain water too. The pipes handle the small storms, your roads handle the big storms. So everybody has a portion of the storm infrastructure with your sheet flow. What we want to make sure is that people don't get flooded, and that when you have large sheet flow areas, that that is mitigated properly. And as I mentioned earlier, whether you have a gravel street or a street with 3 inlets in front of your house, you are still under DEQ's permit that the city has to manage. We have to do water quality citywide. And as a customer, as a homeowner, everybody drives roads when it rains or snow melt events. So everybody does benefit. But yeah, if there's a street, you mentioned how do we get infrastructure? As we look at new development for roads, I mean, that's part of the reason some of these West End roads are so challenging is where you can put your stormwater. It is top of mind for new subdivisions, certainly for selfishly in engineering. Managing stormwater is very, very important, and we want to make sure everybody has a approach that's reasonable for their street.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Neese. Turkington?
Thank you, Mayor. Do you know what level we're spending now on each of these 3-4 categories?
I think that would be a great question for either Debbie or Jennifer.
So council, we don't have a breakdown as this is broken out here. What we have is we collect about $5.5 million in revenues for storm each year. Of that, $1 million is for debt service on previous capital projects. And then the other portion of it, about 2.2 million each for operating and 2.2 for capital is how it's broke out.
Okay, let me follow up on that, Mayor.
Go ahead.
So where is the debt service and operation then in these numbers?
So Mayor and Council, this is really just to pick what level of service we have going forward. So deferred maintenance would go into our operating bucket. The citywide capital, flood protection capital, and water quality capital would go into that bucket, the capital bucket. Debt service just continues. It's not on here because it's not a choice at this point, but it was included in the estimated rates that you've seen here.
Okay, Mayor, so let me understand. I think I heard you say the deferred maintenance goes into the operation level.
Correct.
So deferred maintenance, our operation was 2.2 million, and we're proposing 3 million for deferred maintenance. So we're increasing that 0.8 in that category, or are you saying you're going to add 3 million on top of the 2.2 million already?
So anything that's up there is an addition to what we're doing now. So
Okay.
we would go from 2.2 million to 4.9 if we went with best practice. Or
Okay, so
2.2
so we're
plus
asking, we're doing
4.9.
5 million now, and you're looking to add, if you're doing best practice, another 5, what is that, another 10 million a year?
Correct.
Okay, that's a lot, that's a huge increase.
It is a big increase. Over time, it's really spread out. But if you look at some of our projects and what we've had in repairs, Tyler mentioned the $750,000 project we have right now. It's so much cheaper to fix things ahead of time than do it afterwards.
Another follow-up on
Last
this,
one, and
Mayor.
then we'll go to Councilman Purinton.
Is there any indication of what the average increase is going to be per resident on something like this? Because we're already seeing a huge increase this year in cost of services for what we did, anywhere from 8 to 25% in some of the services. And we got a parks levy bond coming out that could increase a huge amount. And so now we're coming up with another increase. I think that just the deferred loan was, if you add those up, it's about the same what we're looking at the parks bond right now.
So, Councilmember Neese, this slide shows the approximate annual increases. So we're starting now at about $5 per month. Obviously, it's paid on the property taxes. I think the total is $59.56 per year is what the average residential pays. And so by this standard in 2025, if we went with the Budget and Finance Committee request, it just kind of shows you on that chart that you're just going up. Do you have that dollar amount? Can you click on that? For 2026? Oh, I guess you can't. You're in presentation view. Okay.
So it looks like about $10 in 2026-ish, going up to 17 and change in 2033.
Okay, so doubling, we're going to 100% increase in our stormwater rates.
So, yeah, so basically it's $497 per month now. It would go up to $7 per month in 2025, and then $10 the following year.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Purinton. Oh, and after Councilmember Purinton, Councilmember Tricky has his hand up. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I guess I was kind of going through the slides, and on slide 15, there was what is the number of incidents of flooding in particular neighborhoods or areas? So I think what I was getting at with that, if all neighborhoods are not equal, have we already adjusted some of these stormwater features in newer neighborhoods? So part of this system, would it be based on the incidence of flooding?
Thank you, Councilmember. So as I've been dealing with stormwater for about 18 years for Billings, you think you have an area fixed and then it rains, and you learn that, no, you didn't. Every large rainstorm, we hear 20, 30 people, streets you've never heard of before. Then you got to go out and try and find a solution. There's no drainage infrastructure. So it is challenging every time it rains. Is it all equal throughout Billings? I think portions of the heights get hit pretty hard. And then I'll call my mom and she says, it didn't rain and it's raining cats and dogs at my house, right?
Right.
And so as storms impact Billings, we do have 7 weather stations located at fire stations and high schools to try and help track this. You know, what level storm is it? We're always after what level storm, because that means something on the design side, and to insurance. You know, you learn that these storms are all over the place. And one of the worst flooding events was actually a snowmelt event, you know, when your inlets are clogged. And so it is tricky. I couldn't point to one area of town that says solved.
Okay, follow up, Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead.
I'm going to try to put a whole bunch of questions in one.
Okay.
So try to follow me. This is going to be hard. So on slide 39, you're talking about the ERUs and that rate structure. So what are the parameters of that ERU? Because you've got the single family that has 22,000 impervious area, then you got another one that's 3,000, and they equal one ERU. So how is an ERU measured? And then are they measured the same way with commercial? Because I know you're putting more into the commercial because usually they're larger and they're more impervious.
Great question. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Councilmember. So the way that an ERU is calculated for Billings, and it is a very common rate structure. This isn't anything that Billings is creating ourselves. We took every single residential property in Billings and measured its impervious square footage. And we came up with a median value of it. And that set the ERU under the premise that a house is a house is a house. The administrative burden of trying to find out everybody's impervious surface, or every time somebody builds a deck or a shed or a patio, what that changes. The administrative burden on that is pretty hard to maintain. And so the premise is a house is a house. And I do appreciate that some houses are larger. Earlier today, I was talking to the public works director about my own experience and my sister-in-law. She lives in Josephine. Her lot is 2,700 square feet. Her house is 1,500 square feet. She produces more runoff to the street than my house, and I have a 10,000 square foot lot. Water leaves my gutters and it just soaks into the ground. She has a smaller lot. Should she pay less than me? She has the same relative impact as me. Commercial property. So in this method, we also measure every commercial property. And we find out how many impervious square feet they have. And divided by 2,600, which is the median residential ERU, to come up with their number. Say it's 10. Well, then that commercial property would pay 10 times what that residential customer would pay.
Okay, I think I'm going to go back to the residential ERUs, because I understand what you're saying, but I don't understand how that equates into the ERUs. One ERU, two ERUs?
1.0.
1.0 what?
1.0 ERUs per house, or per single family residential lot.
And so it doesn't matter how large the house is or how large the lot is?
That's correct, yes. Under this approach, big houses on big lots, small houses, small lots, have the same relative impact spread over 36,000 people.
Okay.
It's a flat rate.
It is a flat rate. Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Trachey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Council. I have two relatively simple questions, I hope, and a comment. The first one is, can you give us an idea as to what the level of daily rainfall you're currently planning for dealing with? And I know June versus September is going to be different, but just kind of a ballpark.
Yes, thank you, Councilmember Shirky. Billings does have a stormwater policy manual. We design for, depending on the type of development, the type of street, the 2 or the 10-year storm. We do evaluate the 100-year storm. 2-year, 24-hour storm, that's a very common storm for most of the United States, other than, Northwest United States and the far south. The 2-year 24-hour storm is a design storm for Billings, and I want to say that that is roughly 1.4 inches of rain in a 24-hour period. The 10-year, I do this for a living, man. 2.2. Thank you, Greg. 2.2 inches of rain in a 24-hour period.
Okay, thank you. So the other question is, what happens when we catch up with if we take the best practices model and we catch up in 15 years of our deferred maintenance? What are we going to be looking at after that?
Okay, thank you, Councilmember. After we catch up with deferred maintenance, I would argue that we're probably never done with maintenance. Your pipes that are really, really old are just going to get older. And you repair what's worse, and what's 60 years old today and 15 years that we don't repair will be 75 years old and in need of repair. I don't think a municipality ever is done fixing their system.
I totally understand that. I guess my question is, is this 15-year, 25-year focus, is that to get us up to a specific standard of maintenance? Is it going to, like, a 25-year replacement plant pattern, a 100-year replacement pattern?
Thank you, Councilmember. It is to get us to a certain standard. We rated each pipe, or we're rating each pipe, category 1 through 5. The 4 and the 5 are the bad ones that you saw. Our goal is to get to 1, 2, or 3 category rating. And the lifespan is dependent upon the pipe that you put in, the pipe that you replace. Our goal with new infrastructure is for it to last every bit of 100 years.
Okay. So the purpose of this 15 and 25-year plan really is to get us up to a standard so that we can relax back to a more, quote-unquote, normal replacement pattern?
Councilmember, yes, that is correct.
Okay, thank you. So I have two questions, two quick comments about this. This is another great example of how my generation has been deferring maintenance on a whole bunch of different things. If we had been paying the maintenance as we go and making it happen, we would be looking at a huge increase right now in order to catch up with stuff that needed to be done in the past and whatnot. Is it an increase in rates? Absolutely, it's an increase in rates. Is it too expensive? I don't think so. I think it's a lot more expensive to expect people to pony up whenever there's an emergency and replace it. I think that one of the things that you'll see happen is that home insurance will probably go down if we have a good maintenance practice in these things. I think I think it's really important for us to understand that this is planning for the future, and this is putting in place a system, a process, which we really don't have right now, which is essentially the ability to actually implement and make happen our stormwater maintenance plan. So all for it. I would go with either the all best practices or the Budget and Finance Committee recommendation is fine as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Rupsis, and I've got a question. We'll go back to Councilmembers Joy and Gulick. Councilmember Rupsis.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to go back to the service levels I think Danny was asking about. You said we're at a 2-year and a 10-year target, or we're planning for the 2-year event, right? Most of the pictures in there, I think, were probably from this last June, where we had, the Gable Road collapse and all that. That was way more than a 2-year event. Was that a 100-year event? I mean, would we have 6+ inches in 24 hours? So I just want to be clear that the changes that we're talking about here will not deal with those events, right? What kind of improvements, though, when we make these improvements, we'll have a little better ability to handle them, but it's still not going to prevent that type of catastrophic event from occurring and having a big impact.
Thank you, Councilmember. Yeah, so a lot of those pictures, not all of them, actually only 2 or 3 were from this June. These are pictures that have been taken various rainstorms, various times of the year. As I alluded to earlier, no, the city does not design for records, and that was a record amount of rain. Will we still have issues in those rain events? Yes. Will they be better? Yes. What this program is trying to do is get to a level of service on the maintenance, the existing maintenance. Those large storm events are disproportionately hard on the existing system, from a sediment level, from a volume and rate. And then as we do new capital, as Billings grows, it just needs new capital. We have to fund that somehow. We will still end up with large rainstorms. We actively manage and try and design around those with our road profiles and our sheet flowing. Can I say today that some of these won't happen in the future? No. Some of these absolutely will be drastically improved. It is very hard to predict where and for what rain. I don't think we could have predicted 6 inches on that part of town. Does that hopefully answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. I think we just don't want to present this in a way, right? We just
that's
have
true.
to be, right, okay.
Thank you, Councilmember.
Another thing I wanted to put, and we had this in the long memo document, but it wasn't in the presentation, the comparison of our current costs to the other cities. And it's always nice to see that. We're generally at the lower end of what is. But if we look at the adjusted, if we go up to 1870, then we're more than twice, we're twice the highest city on that. And I don't know any other place where we come out like that. Are those other cities just not keeping up with their maintenance? How is our only option here to go to twice what our current highest peer is spending?
Thank you, Councilmember. Yeah, so that would be on page 21 of the report. 9 years from now, yeah, it's higher than what Kalispell is today. I work closely with Kalispell, Bozeman, Missoula, their stormwater people. Bozeman is doing the exact same thing that we're doing now. They went through when City Administrator Kukulski was at the City of Bozeman doing this 5 years ago, and they're already back asking for a change of their program because they didn't cross the finish line. Kalispell, they're high now. They're doing the same thing ahead of us, or behind us, sorry. But really, we're trying to look at what works for Billings. I know it looks like a high increase. I get that. And no, we don't want to be on the right-hand side of anybody's graph, right? But we're trying to find out what works for Billings. And through this process with the advisory committee, the Budget and Finance Committee, Public Works Board, the time frame is really what we're trying to hone in for Billings.
So we can expect some increases in those other cities probably is what I'm hearing.
And just one more, if I could.
Sure,
Mayor.
go ahead.
And it's actually for Jennifer. Jennifer, before, and I think I know what you meant, but I wanted to give you just a chance to clarify this. You said that these increases are much less, or are much better financially than dealing with the impacts afterwards, right? And I think we probably all agree with that. But we're looking at a $10 to $11 million annual increase. And the example you pointed out was a $750,000 road repair. So just wanted to give you a chance to kind of clarify that and add some more context.
Yeah, Councilmember Repsis, we actually talked about a couple of different projects that we had to do after the fact versus finding it earlier and being proactive during the advisory committee meetings. And it was close to double the amount once it's been a failure. So obviously that was a smaller scale project, but if we get into these larger projects and larger failures or multiple failures during a storm, it's going to cost more later to not fix the problems now. And just to clarify on the rates, as far as if you're looking at what we're going to be in 10 years compared to these other cities now, that's exactly what you're looking at as to what they're at now. Ours also includes inflation and inflationary assumed amount, so it's not those numbers for this whatever level of service you choose plus inflation. That's assumed in there, whereas the other cities do not have that.
Jennifer, while I've got you there, I assume we have no concept of, or no number for property damage to our homeowners. These are flood claims, they're not covered by homeowners insurance, so we have no idea of what those would be, but presumably it's in the millions of dollars each year.
Mayor Cole, we tried to get that number, especially there was so much talk on the committee about the cost of inaction, but those aren't numbers that are available to us. So, we can just go from the number of people that call in.
Okay, thank you. We've got a lot of questions. Tyler, I've got one for you. I wonder if you can get your mind out of the gutter and go 30,000 feet, please. At big picture, what does an ideal stormwater system look like, and how does it impact our land use picture? And specific examples. Is the goal here to pipe everything, get it underground, which I assume is the most expensive option, but the least visible, and also allows for the highest rate of density? You don't have big surface impoundment ponds in the middle of New York City. That's just incredibly inefficient, and yet we have a policy that tells people they have to retain all that stormwater on their land, which they can only do by having more land, which reduces density, which is contrary to everything else we're trying to do to create a more dense city. So what's the ideal picture look like in the future, especially in that biggest dollar number, the 93 million or whatever it is for future capital improvements? What's our end goal?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Getting the chance to talk about stormwater is just my cup of tea. So, what's my grand plan? So I think what's an ideal system look like? I'll talk about deferred maintenance first. I think an ideal system for deferred maintenance is something that you don't ever see. You don't see the guys sweeping the streets. You don't see any of the repairs. The pipes just work when it rains. The small storms, water just disappears, right? I put my trash out on Mondays now. It just disappears. That's ideal for stormwater. Small storms, it just disappears. New infrastructure, we're balancing the old versus the new, right? New growth areas. And I'll pick on kind of the West End, for example. It's a combination of a lot of different solutions. And we have studied this quite a bit. The city, the consultant team, it's a mixture of pipe. It's a mixture of green infrastructure, your ponds, utilization of the ditch and drain networks. As I mentioned, the Billings, especially the West End, is spaghetti networked with the ditch and drain companies. Leveraging what they have to offer, we've met with them, we've talked to them, we've seen what their needs are, what our needs are, and how we might play together. It is a combination of green infrastructure and pipe. Portions of developed town, portions of like Rimrock and Grand Avenue. Grand Avenue is actually a great example, from 8th to probably 15th. That's a tough area to drive in big rainstorms. That one probably just needs a bigger pipe. We know that. We knew that in 1960, and we didn't put it in. We still know it. So, yes, Councilmember.
Okay. We'll get you on the list.
Okay. And then you asked about, how does it fit in with development? We have a development engineer here now, and I would love to get his thoughts on it too. But when new subdivisions come in, the water system is there. The sewer is there or within reach. The roads are there. If the drainage infrastructure isn't there or the drainage plan, we have had to rely on a lot of unconventional solutions that haven't always worked out well for the city. It is putting that infrastructure in place, or the mechanism for that to be in place. For in-town development, you mentioned commercial sites have to keep a certain amount of stormwater on site. That's true. That's part of our policy manual. That's been part of our policy since that manual came out in the 80s. And that is to help. We know that our system is undersized, and shifting that on-site detention to development helps our existing system. It makes them pay for what they contribute, but it helps our existing undersized system. And that same methodology is applied on the subdivision level too.
Okay, thank you. Counselor, with your permission, I'm going to go to Counselor Tidswell just because everybody else on my list has had an opportunity to say something. And I didn't see your hand up. Okay, and then we'll go to Councilmember Shaw. Councilmember Tidswell, Councilmember Shaw.
I've got to think.
Go ahead, please.
I've got to think that as we build.
Mike.
Oh, is that right? Yeah, okay, sorry about that. I've got to think as we build these commercial lots and we pave over for parking and everything, that's got to create a problem with runoff, correct?
Councilmember, yes.
So, yes, yeah, that's what I'm looking for. So what are the pros and cons of requiring a porous asphalt? There's a ton of them out there. And again, above and beyond cost, what are the pros and cons of requiring a porous asphalt to be used on these projects, as it were?
Thank you, Councilmember. Yeah, so porous asphalt or porous concrete as well, that's another similar option. It is, for those not familiar with it, it's where water soaks quickly through the asphalt. We allow that for development. It has to be the right site because we are primarily concerned about maintenance. If it's hard for the city to maintain, it's going to be really hard for a private business to maintain. They do require maintenance, basically a big vacuum cleaner. Nobody in town has one. Basically that sucks up the sediment from your asphalt or your porous concrete. We would allow it. We invite solutions, alternative solutions. That is kind of the way I feel like the industry is hopefully heading. It takes on the asphalt especially, it takes a little bit to produce it. And we went through a test case maybe 10 years ago. Knife River actually has some in their parking lot off of Hesper and Shiloh. They've made some as a test case. It's hard. It's tricky to produce mass-wise or to scale up for an asphalt supplier.
And there's nobody doing that right now?
That's correct, but we would encourage it.
Okay, thank you.
And allow it.
Thank you, Councilmember Shaw.
Thank you. I don't think I have any questions, but I just want to run through a couple thoughts. I like the best practice model. I'd be fine also with the Budget and Finance Committee's recommendation. I'm definitely for development fees. I'm curious about, this is maybe a question for Debbie, but if our cost of services study is going to tell us anything about what that number looks like, I would hope so, or I assume there's some metric for that. I really like the nexus of land use and the permeable surface. I think that's a really great way to think about it that I've never really heard before, so I appreciate that. And then, let's see, the last thing is, nobody's really mentioned, but this swap from 60% residential to 40% commercial, flip-flopping that, I think is really smart for our community, and it's going to save our homeowners money and put more of the burden on the commercial structures, which is where we see a lot of that porous, huge, parking lots and things like that. Non-porous, sorry. So maybe Debbie, I guess I do have a question. If you could address that cost of services issue and if the $1,000 is just an estimate.
Jennifer actually likes to talk about money more than I do, but yes, phase 3 of this actually dials all of this in. Once we have direction on where we want to go and do we want a development fee and at what levels do we want everything, then yes, the next phase is to figure out what those numbers actually are.
Okay.
So it won't be in the cost of services, we'll do our own.
Got it.
Yep.
Okay. But some cost of services
Yep.
model. Yeah, okay. So I think I answered all 3 of your questions that you had, but you guys feel free to reach out. And thank you for all this work. This is a ton of work and very important for our community. I guess I'll say anecdotally, I hear this from people all the time. Why are my storm drains not draining? I live in the older area of town, which has a lot of those 4 and 5 storm drains. And I say, well, you got to maybe get out and clean them. They're like, why isn't Public Works doing it? Well, we have 9,300 of them and not all of them are working as they should. And so that's a big part of the problem. So I think this will address a lot of people's concerns.
Go ahead, Tyler.
Councilmember Shaw, thank you for bringing up the question about the 4060. There was a reason it wasn't in today's presentation. Late Friday, we found an error. We weren't comfortable presenting it today. We don't exactly know exactly what it is. It actually might be completely backwards. It was big enough to not even present, which is too bad, right? You guys saw our presentation. We worked pretty hard on that write-up. and we might have got something wrong. So I apologize for that.
Well, thank you for catching it. Let us know when you get better numbers. Okay, so we'll go to Councilmembers Joy, Gulick, Purington, and Owen and Neese, and then we'll try to wrap up here. Council, just a reminder, Council, that staff's looking for direction. What I'm hearing, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that there's going to be a default, because I'm not hearing a lot of objection to any of this, and so I'm assuming there's going to be a certain natural tendency to approve, or the understanding is going to be acceptance of the Budget Committee's recommendation on that element and all the other staff's proposals, unless you say otherwise. So just trying to be clear as comments go forward. So council members Joy, Gulick, Purington, Owen, and Neese. So council members Joy.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Yes, I don't really think that I agree with and I don't want to make it sound like agree. I'm not sure on the analysis of the Budget Committee by not going to the recommended advisory board recommendation. And the reason is, if you could put that slide back up, we start at $5, yes, of the other one with the graph. And we start at that $5, and as we go out year 20, 30, 31, we start to see that gap. I don't imagine in 2033 that $1.30 is going to do me one bit of good. Because I can tell you, I have a certificate of deposit, and I'm telling you I'm losing money on it. I put my $1.30 in the bank, and it isn't there 5 years later. It's not even there at the end of the year. $1.30 is not going to, I can't get a return on $1.30, but if I put my $1.30 in with everybody else's $1.30, we can do more than my $1.30 is ever going to do. It isn't paying me anything on my savings account, my checking account. I'm losing $1.30. I'd rather put my $1.30 with everybody else and do something that everybody can benefit from. So I would go with the other recommendation for the 1870. And second of all, I wanted to, I did a little Google search. I just did one city below us in terms of what we charge and that kind of graph that goes with it. And I did Seattle, or Spokane, June 8th, 2023, huge event. Thousands lose power as wind hits the Spokane area. Possible flash flooding. Then I chose, just by randomly, I chose Fargo, Moorhead. Oh my goodness, Fargo, North Dakota. The Red River Valley floods really, really bad. They built their city even closer to the river than we built ours. And so I continue to look. These cities that are lower than we are very close, are not going to stay there. They're experiencing extreme rain events like we are. And in the Fargo-Moorhead area, they have a $2,000 million investment, which I think is the same as $2 billion, right? $2 billion investment to divert stormwater, because they fled so severely. So I don't think that we're out of trend here. I think we're on trend to try to deal with this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Gulick and Purington.
Many of the things I was going to say have already been addressed, so that's great. So I think I would just say, again, I think some of the comments someone had prompted me again. We can pay for a lot of these costs in insurance and not get anything useful out of it. It just happens again and again. Or we can pay the same thing and actually prevent a lot of these events by actually paying for infrastructure. So I think when we look at the context of where, how much money we're talking about, it's actually quite small relative to almost, a lot of other things we talk in the city. Not to diminish it. I mean, everything adds up. I don't want to say that. There are some other ancillary benefits we get out of spending more money on this, though. we get more street sweeping. Again, as Tyler's mentioned, it's a lot less expensive to get sediment and other stuff off of the street than it is to try to vacuum it out of our system. So part of the additional cost is a more intensive street sweeping. That has other benefits to us. There's less trash, there's less dirt and things like that. And so there's some other benefits worth mentioning. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Purington and Councilmember Rowan?
Thank you. So I wanted to look at slide 40 on the system development fee. And I think you alluded to the infill, new development versus infill. So it's my understanding with infill, you already have the existing. Now, it may not be upgraded. And so whenever you put new in, it's going to be the best of the best. So what is the difference in these rates here? Does it make a difference if it's infill versus new development?
Could I actually have, thank you, Councilmember, could I have Jennifer or Debbie answer that
You
question?
can have
please?
anyone answer that one.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So it'll be similar to how water and wastewater works. It doesn't really depend on infill versus if it's on the west end, but it's going to look at each and every project and determine how much of that project is for growth. So obviously, if you're doing more of an infill project, it's not really going to go into the SDF formula at all.
Oh, okay, perfect. And just to also, the city does not have any liability to residential flooding. Is that correct?
It's usually correct. Usually homeowners are stuck with the bill. But we do pay out storm claims for certain storms that we encounter.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Owen, Councilmember Neese?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm not sure who wants to tackle this, but I want to ask a little bit about the capital projects exhibit, which I think Debbie's page 23 of the presentation. So during our conversations about this, we sort of went through a typical year for you guys and what it looks like. And I think you'll say it better, so I'm just going to kind of tell you what I remember, and then you could fill in the gaps. Is that essentially, you take your budgeted amount, your collected amount, and there's a certain portion allocated to operations and deferred maintenance, and ideally to capital. But what happens generally is there are emergencies, and that wipes out the capital. So we're seeing here in this, what's on my screen pink, and that is some sort of weird flesh color, is that portion of the community is building out without adequate stormwater infrastructure right now because the majority of your time is spent responding to emergencies. So when we look at the sort of options of charts, what it doesn't capture there is we're digging ourselves a hole if we don't address it somehow. Can you fill in the gaps of my memory on that piece?
Yes, Councilmember Owen, thank you. I don't know if I can say it much better than that, but really what we're doing with this process is switching our mindset. Services will be based on rates, not rates based on services. And really trying to address exactly what you said. Every time there's a reaction event, it takes away from something else when you only have so much money in your bucket to start with.
I think it would be helpful if you could kind of maybe characterize how much time you spend responding to emergencies due to system failures, storm events that are foreseeable. I mean, obviously we have unforeseeable things or sort of historic events, but let's talk about the ordinary bread and butter, just emergencies that you're running to and from all year long.
Thank you, Councilmember. Yes, so in any given summer, a handful of people from the office will respond to claims or homeowner concerns. And it's probably every bit of 20 to 30. Some summers it doesn't rain as much, right? But others, like I mentioned earlier, you'll get a call from somebody who's flooded. And you've never been to that street. You think you've been to every street in town, every solution is different. Some aren't the responsibility of the city to fix. Sometimes it just might be, not a city issue. A lot of times, though, we look, we survey, we take photos, we respond to everybody. It does take a lot of time. I don't have any number for staff time, what that means. But summers, when it starts to rain, I that's my blood pressure goes up, so.
You want to move to the desert where it never rains. Councilmember, I'm sorry, Councilmember Owen, were you done with the?
I believe so, Mayor. I think I had another question, but it's escaped me at this point.
Okay, Councilmember Nice? And then, council, we're almost at 7:30. We'll try to wrap up so we can take a break.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. So real quick, because I heard this a couple of times, someone mentioning that if the city invests in the stormwater projects, that are the homeowners insurance rates could go down. I know in the fire, if we're rated a certain way, there is a special rating for homeowners on fire. Is that true in this case? Because we mentioned it, and I just want to make sure the residents know that there is or is not going to be any kind of break on insurance.
I don't know if the city can speak to that.
Okay, so you don't know of any indication where the insurance companies give breaks on their rates based upon city's investment in stormwater?
So it's not typically that straightforward, but we have heard of people that lose their insurance because they flooded every year for 5 years in a row. And so there's more impacts on that end when people really can't get insurance or whether it's really onerous for them. So we haven't heard of that direct calculation of, hey, we're at a 2-year storm, so you go down 10%.
Okay, so we can't expect it to drop, but maybe there will be less frequencies and people may not lose their insurance.
Right, and we could certainly talk to some insurers to see if there's things that they look at as far as how many claims they get in the area or something like that to set rates. So we could certainly look at that and get back to you.
Okay. Mayor, and then Debbie, this is actually going to be for you too, I think, because early on you had all the different people in the departments that were involved in the committee. And maybe I missed it because I didn't see it in my presentation here, but was planning involved at all?
Thank you, Councilmember. Planning was not a member of the advisory committee. We had Parks so we do work closely with Parks. We work closely with planning too. Obviously, every new subdivision.
Okay, the reason I'm asking this is because one of the things I think is every time a subdivision goes in, we build a street, we cause more problems because we're building curbs and we're taking that water and capturing it and sending it down to the neighbor, and then we have to treat that water. I've seen it in my neighborhood where we didn't have curbs at all in the neighborhood, and then someone would come in, put in a curb, shove it off to their neighbor, and then suddenly they've got flooding and down the road and things like that. So I think that's why I'm asking if planning is involved, what type of things, as Councilmember Tisdale mentioned, impervious type of, or parking lots that the water can flow through. That technology has been out for a long time. We've had strip curbing along Lake Elmo because, to help prevent some of the flooding along there, and I think that's been successful. So I'm looking to find out ways that where we don't have to treat the waters, much like the mayor mentioned, is, what's the perfect world? How can we look at doing things differently in planning and building so that we don't have these huge expenses coming down the road every time we put in a subdivision? Or if we're doing a road remodel, how about if we tear out all the curbs and put in a different type of system so we're not having to capture that water and treat it and that. Is there anything that you're looking at in planning that could help with this so we don't have to continue to create more problems by capturing water? Then what do we do with it?
Councilmember Neese, thank you. I think one question I can probably address myself and one I might leave for Debbie. So on the new subdivisions, yes, every new subdivision, when it comes in on preliminary plat, planning department, public works, parks, they all circle up and figure out what this subdivision looks like. We are very inventive on the west end. We try to be. A lot of the times the ideas that we have for stormwater, the developer runs with. Other times they don't. We very much like these mixed uses for stormwater purposes. Because you're right, anytime you put a street on there, something's going to happen, right? So trying to balance out requirements, curb gutter, sidewalk for these residential streets with where that water goes. Yes, we do work hand in hand with the planning department, not only for local subdivision drainage, but also master planning as well.
Yeah, and I'm not just talking about the new, but I'm talking about existing where you would actually take out curbs. Yep. Make sure, find ways to prevent the water from having to be captured and shipped down to someone else. But that's something I would hope to have planning involved in this whole discussion down the road and find ways to treat the water differently that we're doing today in that, because it's very expensive. Then the last question I have is, and Councilmember Rups has touched on this, and I think a couple others did too, but I don't know really what we're going to get out of this, because your pictures on page 13, 14, 15, and 16 showed a lot of flooding. But as I understand, that was all 100-year flooding. And so I would rather have seen, I think it's a little disingenuous to show us pictures of these areas that are underwater, that this whole project, that all the money we spend now is not going to solve that, and see really what is it we're going to solve. What are the events, the 2 to 10 year events? What are those events? Because I understand that's the ones we're going to solve. Those are the ones that we're going to stop seeing flooding and stuff like that. Am I correct on that? The 2 to 10 years flood events will go away?
Councilmember Neese, thank you. You'll solve every picture you see in front of you on this screen right now. Those are solvable.
Okay.
That is what we're trying to do with this.
Yeah, that's slide 6. I'm talking about slide 14, 15, 16.
Yep. So those large storms, you're right. There are these massive storms. Those are the issues that we deal with. I don't want to sell sunshine and rainbows and unicorns.
Right, so why are we showing these pictures if we know we're not going to solve that?
Because they're issues.
Yes, I agree there are issues. That's no problem, I understand, but we're not, this amount that we're going to spend on here is not going to solve that. So what other pictures, what are some of the events there? Do you have any pictures of events that we actually would solve? So this is solvable, these type of things?
Councilmember Neese, yes, these are all solvable.
Okay, so this is the type of stuff when we go into this level of service being recommended by either the budget committee or the full, or your committee there, we're going to solve these type of things.
Councilmember, yes.
Okay, thank you.
And I believe you said you'd make the 100-year events less severe, to some degree. Hard to define, I imagine. So, okay, council, thank you very much. Let's open it for public comment. We have a lot of people with us. We appreciate their efforts. They may have heard something they want to comment on. We want to make sure they have the opportunity to do that before we take a break. This is a opportunity for public comment. If you'd like to comment, you know the routine probably. 3 minutes and tell us who you are. Unless you require no introduction, Rick Luthold.
That's right. That's right. You got me in the book someplace. Mayor and council, thank you very much. Rick Luthold with Sanderson Stewart. And I had the pleasure of serving on the advisory committee, and I might be the only one who ends up speaking because the rest of it is consultant team that's been deeply involved. They did a wonderful job. Staff and the consultant team did a wonderful job. And again, it's been a real pleasure. Wonderful discussion from the council this evening. Great input. And can we go back to 23? No. You already closed it down? That's an excellent slide. It was brought up several times, and I want to again speak to Councilmember Neese's comment about, well, several mentioned the idea. What's so exciting about this is right now the city, and for years the city has struggled with just keeping up with keeping our pipes flowing, just keeping the water getting in the inlets. That no, the one with the flesh-colored. Councilmember Owen said, that's that flesh-colored, 20, what was it, 29? No, I can't. Okay. That one there. That's perfect.
Salmon.
Salmon, not flesh-colored, salmon. But, you know, the aspect of doing something exciting rather than just, we're behind the curve trying to take care of what we've got. And so you never get to think about how to fix it and do it right. And, you know, you think about the East Billings Urban Renewal District area, the old town part of town. We started putting pipes in there 100 years ago, 120 years ago, old stave pipes. And you get them in and you never get them any bigger. It's very, very expensive to go back. We've done a few projects down there to make it bigger because we were popping manholes off, lids off of the tops of manholes down there. And so that yellow area is all pretty much in, it's been put in, and we're continuing to put more water into that. And you just can't do it. You can't do it that way anymore. And so this idea of maybe coming out in here and getting some big recreational areas and putting in some ponds and doing something that takes that storm runoff, utilizing those irrigation systems that are out there, that kind of thing. You can save a lot of money. You can do some things very creatively, and the people, a lot of the people I work with, the developers would welcome that immensely. Right now we're saying, well, you got to take care of what's on your site and do that long term because we can't put any more water back in those pipes there. You don't have any place to take care of it. So very excited about that aspect is get to a point where our deferred maintenance is staying here, where we can think proactively about how to do this better in the long term. Very happy to see the restructure of how it's paid for. Again, time goes on, pretty soon a decade goes by, 3 decades go by, you're still doing it the old way. And we've never come back and rebalanced how we charge for this. And Councilmember Shaw's comments were right on target there in the study. The aspect of going to impervious on these lots equalizes that. And again, from a developer standpoint, that's very important. And it also then you go back to multiples of that on your commercial areas. I think the Costco, the places where they have a lot of asphalt, you can go back to those multiples of that in order to capture that. So very supportive of the ERC kind of aspect, ERU of getting those numbers there, and the dollars, and this aspect of being more proactive in how we take care of it. And just one last thing with regard to the levels of storms and the impervious we talked about. Storm events are going to ebb and flow and that kind of thing. Anything we can do to improve, to take some of our load off of our system will help us in those big events. And I think the pictures of the big events just keep people in mind. But I think to the comments earlier, we need to have the constituency know that we're not going to take care of all of those things. I always do a presentation when we're putting a new storm drain, and I said, you know what, it's still going to flood someday. Count on it, however big a pipe we put in. And the last thing with regard to the impervious, although we might think that's a great way to get water in the ground, it isn't just, you gotta have a vacuum cleaner to suck it out of there. You still have to put a layer in underneath it to store your stormwater that you're taking out of there. It still gets piped someplace. A lot of our valley does not have very pervious soils. It's a tough thing to make work in this particular part of the region. So it's a great thought, but it's tough to make work. So thank you very much. Appreciate it at the time.
Thank you. Yes, the devil clay. Other public comment? Anybody else who'd like to comment before we close our time? Okay, no one's coming forward, so we'll close the public comment period. Council, we want to take a break, but what do we need? Is there anything? I've already stated, I guess, my assumption, which is that we are implicitly, if not explicitly, with some sort of vote, telling staff to continue to move on this in this direction. But do we need to fine tune that in any way? Or, because I think that's going to be the assumption, unless we say otherwise. Councilmember Owen?
Mayor, would it be all right if I asked Rick a quick question?
Sure.
Do you mind answering a quick question? One of the things that I was a little concerned about, and am often concerned about, is when we do significant overhauls of our pricing structure, we don't necessarily invite enough public input early enough in the process. So as a committee member, I wanted to know what your thoughts were. Would we have been better off, or would we still be better off, if Debbie held a meeting with sort of all the builders and developers in the community, or did public meetings around the community? I mean, do we need more input here, at least from developers in the industry, to make sure that we sort of have everybody's voice? Or do you think that was captured already?
Councilmember Owen and members of the council, I believe we've captured that. It was a very diverse group that sat in, well covered from all the different facets of folks who participate in those types of projects. I think you can analyze to death some of these things, and I think that's the kind of loop you get into with that. I think it was well captured. I think it was well presented and comfortable with that fact, and so it comes back to then folks have to make a decision based on that and carry it forward and support it. So,
Thanks, Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Council, anything else? I just want to follow up on that point, which I think is a very good one, which is, politically speaking, I guess I would appreciate knowing that the Home Builder Association, developers have all had an opportunity to comment, even if they weren't part of the diverse decision-making group. If nothing else, it allows us in a year or two after you've invested hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of time to say you had your chance. And that's very important. And if they haven't had their chance, I think that would be a wise thing to get this out to the community. That's just my political judgment. I see some nodding heads on that one. So, Okay, council, I'm going to tell us that we can take a break here if I don't see any frantic hands. I don't. So 7:40, let's come back as close to 7:45 as we can, and we will take up with the modifications of the Special Improvement District policy. Item number 4. Out of here.
Oh, apparently I'm taking care of Tyler's stuff too tonight.
All right, well, back with everybody. Councilmember Tricky is still with us online, and everybody else is back. So we left off with item number 4, resolution modifying special improvement district policy. Debbie will be making the presentation here once she has her PowerPoint up. Yeah.
Okay, Mayor and Council, I'm Debbie Melling. Yes. So I'm going to talk really quickly about a change that we need to make to our special improvement district policy or resolution. So this resolution would actually replace Resolution 04-18204. Obviously, it's been in place for about 20 years. We could modify the resolution, but it's so hard to find all the resolutions and track them back that my preference is actually just to kind of rescind the old one and start the new one. So that's why I'm doing that. So the big thing that changes on this one is the way we assess property. So if you look at our existing resolution, it says only those properties that are physically addressed are assessed. So a situation like this, it's 4th Avenue North, 4th Avenue North. And you've got 12th Street there, and not that it matters which one, but those two businesses are both addressed off of 4th. So 12th has never been built. It's a gravel road. It's basically a parking lot for both of them. And under our existing policy, the city residents pay for that. So that would be one of the issues that we see with the way the policy is currently written. The new resolution would basically say for all residential, it would be consistent with what it is today. So address side, they pay for. If they're addressed off of Poly and we're building on Poly, it's Poly. If they're addressed off Poly and it's 17th, they don't pay for 17th, they only pay for Poly. So really what it does is it makes our residents only pay one side or the other of a corner lot. But what it does is it says that commercial industrial, you're getting the benefit of both of those sides. And so you would pay for both of those. The big thing here is it's consistent with 2 other policies we have in place. 18-10-719, if you can see it behind there, is our policy that, or a resolution that is in play when we have things like Central and Grand and these streets where we assess adjacent property owners. It says commercial industrial pays both sides and residents just pay the address side. So this brings it consistent with that. It's also consistent with new development. So if a developer comes in and they have a corner lot, they are responsible for both sides of that property. So really what this does is make sure that regardless of the mechanism of development or mechanism of construction, the assessment is consistent between all 3 of those. The other thing is, in our existing resolution, we actually define the widths of residential streets that you have to pay for under this SID policy. Our preference is to have it refer to the subdivision regulations. We're currently reviewing those subdivision regulations, and as our city code changes, we don't want to have a resolution that refers to something that's no longer being built. So it's just a way for us to make sure that consistency stays in place as subdivision regs change over time. And the other thing it does is, right now, everything says it will be built to a residential street standard. We need that to say residential for residential streets and commercial for commercial streets. So the standard would just change to reflect what that street actually is. And the last thing is, we have 2 policies in place. One of them is for new streets that are basically gravel that become asphalt and curb and gutter and sidewalk. So we're calling those new streets. That is an SID. Existing streets that we have a lot of non-maintainables, or we have like Central Avenue, you guys might remember, was a 2-lane road. We widened it, put curb and gutter sidewalk, and people were assessed for that. That's under this resolution 18-10719. So what we're doing is, instead of having that addressed in both places, we're taking that out and just referencing the other resolution. Again, just to make sure we don't have 2 things talking to the same issue and being inconsistent. So we're simplifying this resolution to make it just apply to SIDs and basically change that assessment method. That's it. I know that was quick, but there's not much to it.
Thank you. Questions for Debbie? Councilmember Pearson?
I have to go back to my notes. On the SIDs, so you're saying on the new streets, those will be an SID?
Yes.
If they have, if they're an existing street and you have to widen it or add curb and gutters, then what are those called?
We're calling them existing streets or streets missing improvements in
The improvements?
neighborhoods it's that 18 resolution.
Okay, so this is kind of the issue I think that we run into a lot of times with the new streets, but there are people that have been there for umpteen years. So if it's an SID, they can protest. If there's not 51% that want to do it, then it doesn't happen.
Right.
Then with the missing streets, that is not an SID, so they don't get to protest. They get a public hearing, if I'm not mistaken. But is there a reason that we wouldn't approve those? Because if you get a lot of complaints from people saying, we can't afford this, we don't want to do this, then what recourse does council have in saying, well, we're going to do it anyway because that's what we do?
So the city council absolutely has the right to say no to those. We bring those forward as a creation document, just like we do on SIDs. The difference is, on an SID, if you get 51% protest, you cannot create it. So you have an option. If you don't have 51%, you can create it, you cannot create it, you have the option. The other way, there is no limitation on whether you can approve it or not approve it. There's no 51% that says you can't do it even if you want to. So really, the council has the same options if there's not 51% protest. You can approve it or not approve it in either case.
So as staff, you're going to tell us why we should, because you're going to approve it. Staff is going to recommend that we approve these, whether it's an SID or the missing sidewalk. And you're going to tell us why we need to do this, or why you would recommend that. So I guess it would have to do more politically with council and what the citizens, are we listening? Because they always say, you'd never listen to us. So, yeah, we do, but, you know, it may be in my ward, but it's not, say, up in the Heights or, you know, downtown. So I'm not going to say they could care less, but it doesn't really affect them, I guess, as much, because I'm representing my ward. So I guess that's the difficult decisions to be made, to weigh whether or not what you guys are recommending, because there's flooding or there's some issue that goes on with these missing sidewalks especially, there's really a real issue. So can you comment on that? I mean, that's one of those decisions on council that I think, you know, some of us anyway struggle with those. So, thank you.
Absolutely, and I would say staff struggles with them too. All of us recognize that, you know, additional fees and costs are tough, and when you've lived in a home for 30 years and you see nothing wrong with the way your street is, then it's hard to say, yes, I want to do that. The majority of ones that we do in that missing program are safe routes to school, or they're ones where we get complaints, a lot of flooding complaints, areas where we need to bring the streets up so that the person at the low point isn't getting flooded every single time it rains. So a lot of times there are things that maybe aren't obviously beneficial to everyone on the street, but they're beneficial to the public as a whole, and that's what we try to offer is why we're going forward with those. That resolution 18 actually has criteria in it that says when we do the projects and why we do them. A lot of them are city council requests, the public request, ours, that kind of thing, and then it has criteria that goes along with it. So we try to stick with that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Rowan.
Thank you, Mayor. I think I want to kind of keep that same thread because there are a lot of gravel streets in the Heights. And I think there's a feeling among neighbors that to some extent they have paid into a transportation system that they have not received commensurate benefit from. And so I think I agree with what Councilmember Purington say, but I'm more concerned about the fact about a fact pattern where a neighborhood very much would like something to happen to their street, but they can't go to this standard because it is thousands upon thousands of dollars. And for many people, they have lived there, paid off their mortgage, their fixed income. I mean, they can't absorb that cost, but the city gives them nothing. It's a binary decision. You either live with gravel or you go to this perfection standard. Is there anything that we can do that at least gets us halfway there? Because it must be better to maintain something instead of gravel.
Councilmember Owen, so that's a tough question, and it's one we wrestle with all the time. A lot of times you have gravel roads, speeds are low. A lot of times they're really wide because people are parking on the sides of them. There's no real curb to keep people there. The minute you pave that and you put a curb, you've put people in the middle of a street that now drives 25, 30, 35 miles an hour. And so the reason that we went to the standard is typical city standard is asphalt, some kind of concrete, and multi-use facilities, typically sidewalks in neighborhoods. The reason we did that was really truly it felt like when we pave those roads, we're not offering a place for our pedestrians to be walking. And the traffic pattern does change on a street that's paved versus gravel. That was the reason we made that decision way back when, and I would say probably 15 years ago was when we went to that standard. That doesn't mean we can't ever do something different. We've had, I want to say 2 or 3 that I can think of off the top of my head, that we've come in and the council said, we want to do it, but no sidewalk. Or we want to do it, but, we want to stop the sidewalk partway or something like that. The city council can absolutely do that. We will bring it to you with the full standard. And I've also had a couple that we didn't bring it with the full standard because we couldn't really build it. It was literally on people's porches. And we're like, well, we're not going to do that. We're going to pave a street. We're going to do the best we can. So we will bring things like that if we really truly cannot build a full street. But the city council, you'll see it in an SID, you'll see 3 different assessments typically: road, curb and gutter, sidewalk. And if the city council doesn't want to do that in a certain place, that is absolutely the city council's right to do that.
I appreciate that. I guess I would just ask that we keep talking about solutions. There are, I think, not just the Heights, but there are pockets of neighborhoods with a huge amount of gravel. And I think we're going to need maybe a different, more sort of comprehensive approach than one neighborhood at a time with massively high assessments.
And I don't disagree with that. We put a lot of money on gravel streets. I personally would love to have every street in town paved. I know our street traffic group would love that as well. It's a funding, it comes down to funding, and everything's competing for that same pot of money. The traffic calming we're talking about, the safe routes, the road improvements, like all of those are the same pot of money. So it's a tough conversation.
Thank you. Councilor Bernice, then back to Councilor Puritan.
Thank you, Mayor. Debbie, when you're on an arterial, is there any change on that? I mean, I think if you're have an arterial street and you need to repair the sidewalks, missing damage, stuff like that, is that still whoever's the owner of that property has to pay for that?
Yes, and we would have very few arterials that would fall under this resolution because this is new SID, and we don't have any arterials that would fall under this. So everything would fall under that 18 resolution, which says adjacent property owners, commercial and industrial, pay both sides of a corner lot.
Okay.
Residents only pay one side.
Residents pay only one side,
Yes.
even on arterial?
Yes.
Okay, and so they pay their arterial side, or they pay the non-arterial?
They pay the addressed side.
Addressed side, okay. And so is that a change from what was?
It is not a change in the missing sidewalk resolution.
Okay.
It's a change in the SID to bring it into conformance with that. So
Okay.
right now, the existing SID says residents only pay one side or the other, but commercial industrial get away with one side or the other too. And we feel like there's benefit to commercial industrial doing both corners.
Okay, for some reason I thought it was on arterial, the resident paid the short side. Okay.
No, it used to be. Before 2018, it used to be.
Oh, it used to be that way. So that changed earlier, some other time?
Yep, 2018.
Okay, 18's changed it. All right, thank you.
Councilor Puritan?
Okay, I don't want this to get too far into the weeds, but I'm looking at the slide on, if I could get to it again, the one on defined widths of streets.
Yes.
So this is interesting that this came up because it seems like some of these streets are really wide, and now we're belly aching that they're too wide, people are driving too fast, and now we want to suck them in. whether we do it with boulevards or we do it with bulb outs, whatever it is. So how does these standards satisfy that safe routes to school and speeding and some of these other things? How do we justify having really wide streets still, but yet we're trying to make them more narrow now with bike lanes and everything else?
Right. So Councilmember Parenting, that's exactly why I want to have this refer to the subdivision regulations, because we're currently reviewing those to say, are they too wide right now? So as we review that and come up with new regs and new widths on those, it'll be reflective automatically in this resolution.
So if with subdivision regulations, where's that property going to go? Does that go to the property owners now? They can have a bigger front yard or a longer driveway? So is that where that land use will go?
So oftentimes what we can do is maybe put a wider boulevard in, make walking a little bit more comfortable. Sometimes we can use that real estate for bike lanes, bike boulevards, some things like that. But yeah, it generally would stay outside of the curb and be front yard or boulevard or something to that extent.
Or on-street parking?
It could be on-street parking as well.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions for Debbie? I don't see any. We'll open up for public comment, but I don't see anybody in the public with us, so we'll close the public comment. There's no one on line. Back to you, council. Debbie needs direction whether to bring this back. I'm not hearing any direction to the contrary. Okay, and I'm seeing some lots of thumbs up. So, Debbie, I guess that's your marching orders if there's no other discussion from council.
Would that come back on consent then? Or would it need a public hearing?
It's an ordinance, so it'll be a public hearing.
It's a resolution
Or
and
is
it's on
resolution?
consent
Oh, you're
on
right.
the 23rd.
Okay, so October 23rd.
Yep.
Okay, all right, then we'll call that a wrap on item number 4. Item number 5, for a change, is not the Debbie show. Yes, you can go home. Thank you, Debbie. Instead, we will look to Gina. This is item number 5, the sale, exchange, donation of city property, the simplified light version.
Yeah, I don't have fancy slides like Debbie and Jennifer put together. I don't have the time to do that, fortunately. Sorry, let me just get situated here. So, Mayor, Council, this presentation or this proposal is an alternative to what was presented to you a couple weeks ago regarding the acquisition and disposition of city property. Based on the feedback that we got that work session, we're proposing this scaled back version to only address the options of disposing of property, and we're not dealing with any of the acquisition of property at this point, and that will continue to be addressed as it is under the current policy. So right now, City Code has this one article with 2 sections in it that addresses this disposition of city-owned property. The sections are 22-901 and 22-902. 22-901 is the section that addresses state law and indicates that this article supersedes state law, and it specifically references one of the statutes, 7-8-4201. So that will all remain. I am proposing to sorry about that. So the proposal is just to add this sentence in red, all other applicable provisions of state law not in compliance with this article are hereby superseded. So the reason this language, that I'm recommending that this language be included, is because 7-8-4201 isn't necessarily the only statute that's implicated by this article, specifically in the next section, 22-902. For example, state law addresses transfers between certain governmental entities, and when there's that particular statute allows cities to transfer, or sell, or trade property to like a county or other governmental entities without an ordinance, without public notice, without public, not having to do a public auction or bids or an appraisal. But our city code under this next section, 22-902, has always required council to proceed with the same process, passing a resolution, making, the public notice and the public hearing before approving a sale. So I think this language is appropriate and necessary to, I think it should have already been in there and should be in there now. So the next section, 22-902, this is the current language that's in the article, or in this section of city code. I have it different colors here, colors of the rainbow, because this is one long section, one long paragraph, and I've simply broken it up into subsections to make it more readable and to make some changes to these different sections. So instead of that, subsection A is, the proposal is this language. That simply provides the authority. It doesn't say that the city council may sell. It provides that city council has the authority to sell. It takes out some of the other language that is then moved down to a later section, which you'll see in a second. The purple is now subsection B, and that provides the additional options of a public auction or a direct negotiated sale. And the mayor has, as you all probably saw, an email out to you all today. The mayor made a good suggestion, something that I missed, that second sentence: regardless of which process is used, the city council shall have the authority to select the bid or offer that is in the best interest of the city, conditionally accept a bid or offer, or reject any and all bids or offers. So that those changes are good and appropriate, and I will incorporate those if council wants to proceed with this. And then finally, subsection B is that last section of that first paragraph that exempts other governmental entities from the competitive bidding process. So this essentially is not changed. Just a little bit of some clarifying language, and subsections E and F, that's changed because it was referencing different numbers or different letters, I believe. So the next big section of 22-902 is the black font has not changed. This subsection A and B is the process that's currently laid out, and this is the section that I have edited, and I think for some clarity, that those specific notice provisions have been changed. I will show you here. That first, as I said, that first sentence, that remains the same, so that's subsection D. But then subsection E and F, which was that A and B, those are the major changes here to the notice section. So these two sections clarify the process that council needs to go through in order to dispose of property. So first, prior to selling, exchanging, or donating real property, the council must find that the property is no longer necessary to conduct city business, or that the public interest may be furthered by that sale, exchange, or donation. Then council must pass a resolution of intent to sell that property, and that determination must be made by no fewer than 6 council members. That's the same number that was already in there. I just moved it down from the top section into this section to try to provide a little bit more clarity. And the next subsection is further explains a process that after that finding is made and a resolution of intent has been approved and adopted, and council would then hold a subsequent public hearing on whether to approve the actual sale or the exchange or the donation of city-owned property. And again, that determination must be made by no fewer than 6 city council members. And then this last sentence indicates the notice provisions that are required. So instead of what we had here, requires this is kind of a unique notice provision that doesn't really exist anywhere else that I'm aware of. Publishing no less than 15 days in advance, mailing notice to property owners. So instead of that, I've included the normal, the usual notice provisions that you see, and essentially just stating that instead of reciting what's in the statute, just referencing the statute as we do in other city code sections. So prior to the public hearing, the city would need to provide notice by publishing that resolution of intent that it previously passed, that council previously passed, as provided in state law, which is the process that we follow in most other situations for the city, for when public hearing is required. And that is essentially it. There's no changes to the remaining 2 sections, well, with the exception of the numbering or the lettering. I think it was 2 and 3, and now it is G and H. But other than that, those 2 sections have not been changed, and there's no recommendation to make any other change to those sections. So I think with that, that should be it. Yep, that's my last slide. So I would take any questions you may have.
Okay, thank you, Gina. So just as a reminder, all of the sections dealing with the city administrator's discretion to enter into certain contracts is not part of this contract, or part of this ordinance. Now, Councilmember Joy.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. City Attorney Dole, maybe you could clarify. In this ordinance, it says no less than 6 members of council to vote on these. Does that supersede our charter? Because our charter calls for a quorum, and a quorum can be 9 members of council. Or it can be, I'm sorry, what is a quorum exactly? It can be less than 6 members voting in the affirmative.
You're right, Councilmember Joy. This is a deliberate difference, and the reason is because I kept what is currently in this city code section, which does require the approval of a sale, exchange, or donation to be passed by 6 of the city council members present. So that is already what was established, but that could be changed to be a simple majority, or that can be whatever council would like it to be. I simply am retaining what was already in there.
Thank you. Just to follow up, do you know why that would be different? I mean, our ordinances, we have so many of them, and they don't require 6 votes in the affirmative in order to do all kinds of really important things, so.
Well, I can speculate that was probably just an acknowledgement of the importance of disposing of city property. I don't know if you recall, but during the last work session presentation, I mentioned the state statute that deals with disposition of city property, and it actually requires 2/3. But self-governing cities like Billings can supersede that and pass an ordinance that is different than state law. So I think the recognition of just a really important decision that a certain number of council members should be on board with that is my speculation about why that is in state statute, and so why it was carried over into, in a way, it was carried over into our city ordinance.
And Councilmember Joyne, I'll just chime in here that I'm looking at the charter, and I think that default rule of a majority, whatever that majority happens to be, is just in our ordinance. Because if it actually were in our charter, I think we'd be stuck. It's like our Constitution, right? We can't operate inconsistent with our charter, but I don't think that actually is part of our charter. So that's what I think gives us that latitude to have a different ordinance for a different situation for a really big thing like selling off land, I guess.
Yeah, that's
is the
correct.
idea.
Sorry, I didn't actually hear you say that. You thought that was in the charter, so I agree with the mayor's statement that.
Okay, thank you. I saw Councilmember Purington, Nice, and Rupsis.
So, Gina, under D and E, that it was talking about the findings and that the property is no longer necessary. So I am thinking that those recommendations are going to come from a department or a staff member. Who would that be? Who does that investigation and makes those recommendations to council?
Well, I mean, I think that that's going to depend on the property or what property it is. I suppose if it's park property, you would hear from parks staff, the parks department, about the need for that property. If it's property that Public Works deals with, I would expect that you would hear from Debbie. I think it's just going to be dependent on the circumstance. It's going to depend on where that property is located and which staff members are the experts on what that property is needed for, or is not needed for, or is used for, or.
So along that same line, in E, it says, if the council makes a finding as required above. So do we know what those findings are? I mean, what are the findings? I know that, with land use, we have a whole list of them.
The finding is just simply as stated in subsection D, which is the city council must find either that the property is no longer necessary to conduct city business, or the city council could find that the public interest may be furthered by the sale, exchange, or donation. So
Okay.
it's one of those two findings.
So what does it mean whenever you say that it's in the public interest?
Well, that's
entail?
deliberately broad so that council can determine if you believe that the public's interest would be furthered by selling or donating this property to an agency so they could do whatever they intended to do with it.
Spoken like a real attorney.
Okay, thank you, Councilor.
One last question is, you made the comment, Mayor, that the city administrator signing, or his authority was not part of this, but yet, isn't that what G is? So I guess that's the question to you.
Subsection G.
G. The last one.
Oh, there is no G on my red line.
Oh, I'm looking at the red lined one.
H is red, it's H.
It jumps from
It's the last
F
paragraph.
to H. How does it start? What words?
It's
The city administrator.
It's actually up.
To establish
Yeah, and it's-
procedures.
It's actually up on your screen too.
Yeah, okay. It's not an ultimate decision by the city administrator there, I guess, but the city administrator is authorized to develop additional policies to establish sale criteria or conditions, a minimum sale price or exchange value, and should have discretion to develop individualized marketing plans to maximize land value and promote city land use policies. So this was from the earlier version.
Right.
And the idea, because we didn't have anything about how you would go about this. And you're right, this does create certain sort of powers, I guess, in how the marketing is conducted. That would fall to the city administrator, but it's not ultimately his decision to say yay or nay. Gina, have
Right,
I said
I
that
would-
correctly?
I think so. I would agree with that. It's this section is more for the city administrator to create procedures or policies, I guess, if you will, to carry out
The sale.
the sale, to carry out the things that would need to be done, any additional processes or.
So, Mr. Mayor, and maybe who to address this to, but, so once the council has made this finding and determined, yes, we're going to sell it, then you go to H, and that will finalize the procedure, because then it has you signing all the documents. The mayor signing the documents. And that's beyond council at that point.
Well, yeah, that's true. The city administrator can supervise the preparation of the documents with the city attorney, but I would not interpret H to suggest that the city administrator has authority to do an end run around the city council and its authority that's very explicit above in approving it.
Right, but that's what I'm saying, is that the council approves it, we've already done that, and then the procedure thereafter is back on the city administrator, and then you sign the documents. It doesn't come back to council.
It does. Oh, so let me try one more time. So in subsection E, that sets forth the, yes, okay, so that sets forth the fact that this will have to come to council at a regular meeting.
Right.
It will be presented to council that, hey, there's an offer, or hey, we're not using this property, for whatever reason, staff is presenting to council, there's a parcel that, we're asking you, council, do you think that we could sell this or exchange it, donate it, or whatever? Do you think that this property is necessary to conduct business? Or, this nonprofit wants it to create some shelter or whatever, do you think that that would further the public's interest? And so if you made one of those two findings, then you'd pass a resolution of intent at that hearing, or excuse me, at that public meeting.
Right.
So after that public meeting, there's this resolution of intent out there. Now, you've all said, yes, we intend to sell this piece of property, or we intend to donate this piece of property. Then then city staff would engage in the process of either negotiating the sale or negotiating a trade, or, determining conditions that may need to be placed on it if it's being donated. City staff would work on that behind the scenes and would then set this for a public hearing after all of those details were worked out. So a public hearing would then be set. The notice would be published to provide public with the notice that here's this resolution of intent that's been passed. The specific sale is going to be considered by council. And then that all information would come back to council for you to consider whether you actually want to approve that specific agreement, that specific transfer with those conditions in it. So it would be noticed up initially on an agenda for you to consider whether you intend to sell it, and then it would come back later for a public hearing to approve the specifics, to address and consider the specific details of the transfer.
So what I'm hearing there is subsection F, as part of the council's right to approve the sale, would assume a finished document, is what I'm hearing there, so,
Yes.
okay. Councilmember Neese and Councilmember Ripsis?
Thank you, Mayor. So, Mayor, I was going to look at your, actually, let's go to number 1, or A, I think it is, 22902A. And sorry, this is really, all right, so what I'm looking here is the city, how we're going to be able to do this. And what I'm not sure about is, okay, here, I'm sorry, it's in B. The city may sell city-owned property by public auction, direct negotiated sale, or by bid. And so what I'm not 100% sure of is when we list with our broker, I don't know if that's covered under a direct negotiated sale. I think we have a contracted broker that the city has selected through a process, and I think we need to indicate that it's, listed with the city chosen broker. And so, because I understand that's what we want to do, is we want to list property, and that's really a contract that we're entering into with the broker to list that property and then have that listed that way. So I'm not so sure if a direct negotiated sale covers that or not, but if it does, then I don't have any objection. Can you address that first?
Gina, so I guess, yeah, the question is, whatever the language is there, direct sale, would that be call it a conventional listing agreement, like you might sell your house?
Right.
Or
yeah.
your business?
Yeah, because we have that contract with the chosen broker. We would list it with them.
Mayor and council, I think that the language does cover different situations. That if in the future there is not a contract with, it's my understanding that contract is limited. This would cover situations where somebody approached the city and said, hey, I'd like to buy this parkland that's adjacent to my property because it's not being used or whatever. It's of, not very much value to anybody but me, or, something like that. They could approach, make an offer to the city that could be brought to council to discuss that. And that's not something that was listed by an agent.
Okay, thanks. Thank you for bringing that example up, because actually that's the example I was concerned about happening. I think if we're going to do any kind of property sale, it needs to be publicly noticed in a way that allows everyone to be able to buy the property. So that was a concern. If I had an alley or a piece of property I wanted to buy, I can go get the council to approve it. And yes, we probably will notice it on our agenda and things like that, but it's not going to be advertised that this property's, for sale. So I'm a little concerned about that direct negotiated sale. I was a little concerned about that, and your example made me even more concerned. I'd rather see that change to where it actually indicates it's going through the city's broker, so it's listed in the public for sale somehow. That's just my concern about that section. And
Gina, can you address what public notification requirements we might or might not have in that kind of scenario?
In the scenario where somebody were to approach the city
Yeah.
and say, I want to buy this piece of property.
Yeah.
Well, it would go through the process I just described, and I think Councilmember Neese is indicating that he isn't sure that that's sufficient. So it would go, first it would be noticed up on an agenda, not necessarily as a public hearing, but it would be put on a regular meeting agenda as, for council to consider a resolution of intent if council wanted to even entertain a sale of that particular parcel. So that public notice would be provided. Obviously, the public could comment, not necessarily during a public hearing, but could comment at the beginning of the meeting. Then if council did pass the resolution of intent, it would come back later, it would be published. The resolution of intent would then be published in newspaper twice, at least 6 days apart prior to the public hearing. And at the public hearing, there would be an opportunity for public comment, not just at the beginning of the council meeting, but during the public hearing, obviously, when the item is being heard and considered.
Mayor, I think there's enough I think you're right. I think there's a lot of public engagement there, but I think I would like to see us add something here. If it's going to be a direct negotiated sale, a realtor is going to put a sign up in the yard, advertise it for sale. Similar to what we do with zone changes, they put the big orange sign out there that there's a zone change at the property. Maybe we need to make sure if we're going to do something that's not the normal, where we're going to allow someone to come to the council, and again, look at our public attendance on some of the meetings. They're not very much, and people don't read the agenda. In fact, I hear this often that we're not transparent enough, but maybe just as simple as if we're going to do a direct negotiated sale, whether it's someone coming to us or through a broker, that a sign has to be placed out there for a period of time, so the public is notified that this parcel is for sale of the city, not just that individual who came to us asking for it, but maybe all the neighbors want to buy that.
Councilmember Neese, is there any reason to limit that to just the scenario of a direct negotiated sale for simplicity's sake? And
I agree.
Just why not always
Anything
the
that's for
property has
sale,
to be posted?
Posted for sale. Yeah, on the property. I agree.
Any concerns about that? Gina, could you create a sentence in B, I guess, 902B? Or unless you find a better place that just says the property will always be physically posted for sale? With a sign that's bigger than a 5x7 postcard? You know?
Right. Like the big notifications you see on the zone changes. They're pretty noticeable.
Okay, and those are specified by size, so
Right.
that'd be the minimum, because those frankly are not very big, so.
So, Mayor and Council, if I can just clarify so that I understand what you're looking for. In the example that we've been using, that an individual has approached the city wanting to buy a small parcel or something that's adjacent to their land, their property, then if such an offer is made, then, and council approves the resolution of intent that council would like to see like a physical sign on that parcel, or I guess I'm just trying to clarify.
Yes, that's
So
what I'm
not sure
hearing.
how I can come up with language, I just want to make sure.
I'm hearing a requirement that at an appropriate point, not just because somebody comes forward, but it does make sense once we have approved that, yeah, we'd like to be rid of the property, right? That we would post that property with a physical sign of a certain amount of size for a certain number of days or weeks. I doubt we care too much about that, but think about that.
Mayor, I think that
Time period.
Jennifer just mentioned, I think something like that could be posted down in the notice under section D. So prior to selling, exchange, or donating real property, if that's going to come to us on the agenda, they post the sign, and it's there on the property, and it's on our agenda.
And that was section D as in dog?
Oh, E. Maybe it's
E as in Edward?
Yes, it's prior to selling or exchange. I've got the red line version, which is kind of messed up.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. That's the logical place.
So, Mayor, Council, what kind of period of time are you looking at for that sort of a posting?
I think
period?
same as the posting, so if it's going to come to the agenda, then it should be posted on the property. So if it's a notice, initial notice that someone's interested, that it gets posted, that this property is maybe available for sale, it's on the agenda, and people can, just like a zone change, you see that the notice is on there, or what the meeting date is.
Okay,
I was-
on this question,
Yes,
Councilor
I just
Shaw
want
had
to
a question.
clarify. I think it makes sense to do it after council passes a resolution, not just because somebody comes to council and says, I want to buy this property. If somebody comes and says, I want to buy this piece of parkland, I don't see why we would need to put up a sign until the point when council passes a resolution of the intent to sell or dispose of it. And at that point, that triggers
And we'd
it.
want a clear black and white line
Yes.
as to
I just wanted to
when you post
clarify
and
that,
not.
that
Does
I.
that make sense? That
Yeah, there-
after we've decided, yeah, we want to dispose of the
Yeah,
property.
I think that
we're
does make sense.
open
I
to
think that would be
offers.
fine to do that. My concern, I guess my question would be about this is because if we are considering of even having the ability to say, put this parkland or whatever piece of land up for sale, it does give the neighbors and everyone around there seeing that the opportunity to come to that public meeting that we're going to discuss, do we want to put it on the market or not? And I think it's just going to give it better notice and more interest in the property.
I just don't, I guess I would say, I don't see a point of doing it before council passes a resolution of intent to sell. Otherwise, you just have somebody show up and say, hey, I want to buy this land, and we have to put out a sign, even if we have no intention of selling it at all. That seems like a huge waste of staff time. Doesn't make sense to me.
That's the other side. It doesn't prevent us, though, from notifying the neighbors, because you're right, you'd want to have as much interest as possible and let the neighbors know about it. But the minimum should be well, at some point, but.
Right, I agree. Yeah,
You're
I mean,
good with that?
if that's too soon, if council thinks that's too soon, I'm not going to be stuck on that point. I just think at some point or
But
another, we
good
need to.
practice, let people know as soon as possible if it seems like a
And I was just
credible
using the zone
thing.
change process as an example of how we follow that process. And usually that's done before the zone changes are approved.
I recommend we let our attorney work out the details.
So just another clarification for myself. The physical posting that you'd all like to see is not necessarily soliciting other offers, but simply advising notice to the public that this is being considered for sale or donation or exchange or
I
something.
guess if the notice is that we have passed a resolution of intent to dispose of the property, that would be the main focus. Councilmember Parrington, and we need to get back to Councilmember Rupsis, is that?
And I didn't finish my.
Oh, and you weren't done. Okay, but on this, is this still on this
It's
issue?
still on this issue.
Okay.
So are you doing something different now?
I'll wait till you're done.
So my question is, why? Why would we do this? Someone comes to council, wants to buy it, we pass the resolution of intent. Yeah, we agree, we're going to sell it. And then I guess the city administrator negotiates a sale or whatever we're doing. But I don't understand why we have to post notice that this property is going to be sold. And who are we going to sell it to?
I'll give you an example. It's not necessarily a good example, but it's one example. We've got a lot of small officially parked properties, and but they don't have much value, but they do have value to the adjacent property owner. So if one neighbor comes and says, I'll buy that for, reasonable price, the guy on the other side is going to have a real interest in what we're doing, and this is just a way to make sure that other neighbors in that example are in the mix.
So, and that was the question I think that Gina, you had was, is that notice for the intent to start, I won't say a bidding war, but that's kind of what it is. Well, if he's going to offer you this, then I'll offer you that. So I mean, I guess that's my reason behind that. And
We like bidding wars
I
if we
know,
are the
well,
seller.
maybe good. But then, so I don't know. I just, I think the city makes things hard enough as it is with our regulations and public hearings and all of this, that I don't know that that's one other thing that we need to do. And I will just add, because I've been involved in a lot of tax deed actions and some of those things, the posting has to go out the very same day that the newspaper goes out. So you would have to coordinate those two things to happen at the same time. And they would go, I think it's usually 2 weeks. A 2-week posting and a 2-week newspaper notice. But I still am not, I'm not sure that it's necessary.
Okay, and we can put this to a vote if there is not a clear consensus. So we'll come back to that. We'll see. And Councilmember Niso, why don't you keep going? And then
Last
we'll
thing
come to
on that
Councilmember
same
Ripsis.
paragraph, Mayor, I wanted to just ask Gina about the bid process, because I want to make sure if it is through the bid process, we're talking about the RFP competitive bid process, where it does require, advertising competitive bids. And so, because that section of it was lined out. And so I just want to make sure it's just, if we're shortening it up by bid, we're not just, and we're actually using the competitive RFP process if we choose to do a bid process. Is that defined somewhere else that I maybe missed?
No, you're correct. It would be the same process that we currently use. And if you're suggesting some
So I would suggest that we just
specific
change that
clarifying
from instead of or by bid, or by competitive RF or bid process, something like that, so that we understand that it is through the competitive bid process or RFP process. I just want to make sure it's not you just don't stand on the sidewalk and, all right, I want to take bids. That's all I had. Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Ripsis, and then we'll try to come back to the issue raised by Councilmember Parrington and get resolution there.
All right, thank you, Mayor. I guess this is kind of along the line of the whole notice, same kind of issue, but I noticed that the the notification to property owners within 300 feet of the potential sale. We're not providing that notice anymore, and I was wondering about that, because almost any property that we would sell would have to go through a zoning change after it was sold to be used, because it's not going to be government use anymore. So if it has to go through a zoning change, they'll have a notification process at that point. So I get that we're eliminating a duplicate notification, but it seems like we'd want to notify property owners, surrounding property owners sooner, so that any objections could be raised before the property gets sold and then might potentially have an issue with a zone change. But then we go down this whole path of, well, how maybe zone change should be included in this in process some way, and that just, I think, makes it too complicated. So I guess I just want to understand the motivation behind getting rid of this notification and any potential ramifications for getting us in a situation where we sell something and then the zone change that would have to happen causes problems, and the neighbors are in uproar about that.
Well, I guess I'm not exactly sure that there would always be a zone change required. I mean, the city can sell property and impose restrictions on the use of that property. And this notice process is still being used. I mean, this is our current city code, notify by mail all property owners within 300 feet.
But we're striking that, right?
Yes, and in its place is the suggestion to notify the surrounding property owners with the physical sign. So, I mean, I think you could do one or the other, or both, I suppose, if you still want to keep the notify by mail all property owners within 300 feet.
Was the mailing notification causing an issue? What was the motivation behind just getting rid of it, other than it was just an extra burden that wasn't adding much value?
It's excuse me, this notification process doesn't exist for anything else. I mean, there might be some similar stuff in zoning, but this just is it's a unique notification process. So I just wanted to streamline the notice to be consistent with all of our other notice provisions. But I mean, that's certainly something you all can determine that we can keep it.
Okay, Councilmember Owen?
I guess I just wanted to weigh in on some of what Councilmembers Neese and Purington have brought up. I think we have a duty when we're disposing of property to act in the public interest. For some of these narrow strips, like the mayor's suggesting, the public interest is probably just getting the best price. So I think it is important that we, make sure that people can put in competing offers. I think that's part of the way we do our due diligence. I think it's a good idea to post on the property, and I actually would do it a little earlier in the process, because I think for us to make a determination that the public interest is furthered by the sale, exchange, or donation means giving the public a chance to weigh in. Maybe there's things going on a particular strip of property that we're unaware of. So for example, maybe that's the safest way for a group of kids to get to a path that they're using to walk to school. It doesn't mean they should be doing it, but they are, and we should at least be aware of that before we sell it to a landowner who closes that off. So I think my suggestion would be that a sign gets posted on the property as soon as the resolution to make this determination goes on the council agenda. So if the council agenda comes out on the Tuesday before the business meeting, stick the sign up that day, just so that people know there's going to be a determination at the city council that we are going to dispose of this property, and that someday in the future we will approve an article and or a offer, and you'll be allowed to comment at both of those periods. That would be my suggestion. I don't think once staff has determined this is going to go to council for a vote, I don't think it's that burdensome to go out and just stick a sign in the ground.
Okay, is there any objection to that? So at least there's, again, a defined point, namely it's now on our agenda. It's not just somebody called Chris and said, hey, what do you think? At least it's on the agenda. Any objection to that?
Can I clarify?
Yeah.
Councilmember Owen, when you say on the agenda, you mean on the agenda for a public hearing? Because.
Correct.
Okay,
Yes,
gotcha.
so the sign then goes on the property to say, the public hearing is being held on this date. If you have concerns, please, or, whatever you
Yeah.
say.
Well, and just to clarify, the first step in all of this, though, is the notice of intent. And does that include the public hearing? Is that the point? I think that early point is what Councilmember Owen is talking about, but what you're talking about is step two.
Yeah, that's correct. That's not what I'm talking about. And the reason I wanted to clarify that was because of the point that Councilmember Shaw made earlier, that I'm not sure why you would put a notice, physical notice, when we have no idea if council has any intent to dispose of that property. It may be something you don't want to dispose of, so we shouldn't put a sign out there until you've actually passed your resolution.
I guess
of
playing the
intent.
devil's advocate here, the analogy would be a zoning application. We post property before we've decided on a zone change just because somebody's told us they want it. And this is the same thing. If somebody wants it, we're going to tell the world about it.
I think,
Okay, so-
what I'm trying to suggest is, in E, we have to make a determination that getting rid of this land is in the public interest. And I think the public should have a chance to weigh in on whether or not that's actually in the public interest, based on what they see every day. Like, what is going on that property? Is it secretly like some sort of great safety path, or are there a bunch of birds on it that are nesting that we would disturb? Or is it just a weed farm that needs to go? I mean, there's lots of things we might not know about that day-to-day use, and I think the public should have a chance to weigh in on that. And I agree with what Councilmember Shaw is saying on burden. So once staff has decided this is going to go to council for that determination, just stick a sign in the ground, letting the surrounding neighbors know this is coming to council.
What is the timeframe?
When it goes on our agenda. So when our agenda is published, that would be my suggestion, when our agenda is published, so the Tuesday before a business meeting.
Oh, when it's published.
Yeah, when our agenda is published, then we put the sign out.
Or earlier.
Or yeah, whenever staff.
No reason not to
decides
give that
it goes
option
on the
of
agenda.
earlier.
Yeah. But I agree that just because someone calls and says, hey, I'm interested, we don't trigger a process. But once it has been vetted to the point to go to council for a determination, I think we can let the neighbors know.
Any objection to that? Okay, you get direction on that one, I think. And we'll see, and if you feel free to send around an email with a draft before it gets into a formal setting, and we can look at it then too. Councilmember Roops, had we already gone to you? Okay, and so we're continuing. Let's try to wrap up,
Sorry, I had
Council.
one last one. I realized I forgot to finish my note, but on yours, Mayor, B section, it says we can accept a bid or offer and may reject any and all bids, but do we want to add or counter offer? It's similar to
That would be
conditional.
just a different type of offer, just means it's gone back and forth. So,
Conditional
yeah,
acceptance,
yeah.
okay, good.
I
Thank
think
you.
we're good there. Okay, Council, are we, Gina, go forth and draft, I guess. Is there any public comment on this item? There's no public comment. We'll close the public comment period. I think that is a wrap then on item number 5. Gina, item number 6, highlights of upcoming agendas. Anything you want to alert us to?
Mayor and council, I think that next week, regular business meeting, there isn't anything that I'm aware of that's controversial, or it's mostly, your consent agenda is relatively short, but what you're going to see next week is a lot of the public hearings setting assessments, setting the SID rates and fees that were scheduled in September that that got pushed off to correct some notice issues. So that's mostly what you're going to see next meeting. And then the only other thing I wanted to highlight for you is the closed executive session that will be October 16th. That's before the work session. That will be at 4:30, and that is for the city administrator annual review. So you all have received an email, I think, from Carla Standen, excuse me, to complete your evaluations, and she will need those back by October 6th so that she can prepare those summaries and get them back to you to be ready for that eval. And other than that, I'm just going to go out 2 weeks. I think that that's about it. And you also get the drafts every work session agenda, so if
Okay.
there's anything you ever see, just let us know.
All right, thank you very much. Any public comment on that? I don't think so. Any items of council discussion? Councilmember Perigin?
I attended the park presentation along with, I think, Councilmember Shaw was there, Neese, Owen, and Shariki were there on that presentation. And I was a little taken back that one, people beyond staff were presenting, which was Mr. Owen and Mr. Arbuskog. And I get very concerned that we're going beyond the step of education. And I know that Mr. Arbuskog actually made a comment that was advocating. And so I'm concerned that we're having outside of staff educating. And I'm not sure that it's educating. I think it's almost to the point of advocacy. So I just have concerns about that. You know, I could actually pull it up.
No, well taken. Mr. Owen?
No, Eric Owen from Riverstone.
Oh, okay, gotcha. All right, thank you.
And there were a couple of studies that were alluded to. One was Mr. Arbuskog, and but I kind of discounted that. But one that the chief alluded to about public safety in regards to parks, but it wasn't parks, it was abandoned lots. And I did not get the reference to that, and I just kind of felt like that was a little bit of over the edge of not being true, if you will, because it was just, well, there's one study that says this. We're not talking about abandoned lots in this levy. So I was just kind of concerned about some of the language that was used. I know Chris isn't here, so he can't address it, but those are some of my concerns.
Okay, thank you for expressing that. Councilmember Neese?
One question regarding the evaluations. When we fill out our evaluations and turn them into Carla, are they going individually to Chris, or are they going as a group summary to Chris as we see a summary of staff? Do you know how those are reported to Chris? My assumption has always been that they're a group, because that's what I've typically seen in the business industry, but I don't know if that's the case. I've heard that he sees our individual reviews.
This issue comes up all the time, and we've not resolved it clearly. I hadn't given it any advanced thought to give you a nice description. What I'm remembering last time is that we gave council members the option to attach their name to their evaluation or not. Because Chris does see the individual evaluations, I believe. And, I mean, if you're anonymous, then you don't have to be a rocket scientist necessarily to make some determination, right? But we didn't want to deprive council members if they want to have their name attached to it by that as well. So maybe we should have figured out how to have had this discussion in a more organized fashion, but.
Mayor, actually, it's my understanding, based on my conversation with Carla Stanton today, that he doesn't see the individual, that she summarizes them and provides that information.
Just the score.
Right.
And comments.
And comments.
Yes.
Okay.
It's my understanding he did not see them last year, the individual. he sees a summary of the
Okay.
comments that Carla puts together.
Is that what you, I mean, I'll help whatever way. Councilmember Boyd, you've been kind of.
Yeah, well, I mean, my assumption is from last year is that it is a summary of all this, but I can call her tomorrow morning and verify that if you want.
Does the summary identify, though, anonymous council member 1, how that person scored, anonymous council member 2, et cetera, et cetera?
No.
It was an average, is that how we did it?
Just like we did with the evaluation
Or
from the direct and
median?
indirect employees. It came as a group.
So maybe we'll try to get you some more information about.
Thank you.
We'll get clarification
That
tomorrow.
issue. Councilor Pearson.
That I don't know who can answer this, is that, and it was this way last year too, with the staff evaluations, is that the way that the flow chart is for who Chris takes care of and who Kevin takes care of. And there were, what were there, 4 or 5 that non-respondents. And so the question is, do they not respond because they really don't report directly to Chris? But I think they're part of that leadership team, everyone. So we're just trying to, we're just trying to figure out
The
why
staff,
everyone doesn't respond.
Mayor, Councilmember Purinton, the staff it's a voluntary thing. So some staff fill those out and some don't. Some may be direct reports and some may not be.
So bottom line is, we don't know their motivation, I guess, but that might be part of it.
So just to be clear then, I think, I can't remember now, it was 8, but maybe 5 responded. Those are both direct and indirect, so we don't know which direct or indirect responded. We just know that's the total of them, correct?
That's my understanding.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay? All right, thank you, everybody. We're adjourned.
Non-agenda items.
What's that?
It's a non-agenda item,
Oh, yeah.
but that's okay. We got nobody.
Yeah.